annual Dukakis International Symposium, organized under the auspices of the Michael and Kitty Dukakis Center for Public and Humanitarian Service, and under the aegis of the municipality of Thessaloniki. This is the third such symposium that we have organized, but it's the first that we're organizing in our new guise as an academic center. I'll explain a little bit more about the history of the Dukakis Chair momentarily. And now I would like to call upon an alumnus of Anatolia College, class of some year in the 20th century, the Honorable Mayor of the Municipality of Thessaloniki, Mr. Yannis Boutaris, to say a few words of welcome. Mr. Mayor.
Για όσους δεν το ξέρουν, αποκτήθησα το 1960 και ήμασταν μία από τις μικρότερες τάξεις του σχολείου. It's not going to be a few words, Mr. President. It's going to last about 15 minutes. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for participating in this conference organized by ACT. I want to open this conference's proceedings by giving the Thessaloniki perspective on reforming Greece and more generally the capacity of the Greek society and polity to reform. I'll do three things in my presentation today. First, take note of the fact that the crisis in Greece has already produced at the local level, to a substantial degree, the renewal of political leadership. Second, analyze how the fact that we operate under severe financial constraints drives change, reform if you will, in the way we produce and distribute public goods and services as a municipality. Third, underline how the country's fiscal and resulting economic crisis has made it imperative for municipal leaderships such as ours to be part of change and reform at the national level, when doing so is expected to improve our city's capacity for wealth creation. The local elections of last November brought to power urban movements that, although affiliated with national political forces, were independent of them. Mr. Kaminis and myself are, of course, the two most prominent examples of the trend, having won the local elections in Greece's capital and second city, respectively. The cities of Ioannina, Patras, Volos, the municipality of Philadelphia were also won over by independent groups and makers. I believe that we won the elections in November 2010 because the massive as well as enduring crisis had so discredited our national political system that the ruling Socialist Party, PASOK, judged that it needed at the local level to share power with personalities and forces that, although in alignment with its own views on local government, were not from the core of the party. This has meant that in the running of cities like Thessaloniki today, you have a group of relative outsiders exercising political power for the first time ever. I say relative because we are a healthy mixture of political insiders and outsiders at Protogoulia, the elected municipality authority of Thessaloniki. People both with long experience of party politics, the civil service and trade unionism, as well as professionals and businessmen who have never before been directly involved in public life. The crisis that has brought us to power has also taught us to respect and be open to each other's diverse experiences, to hear out both the ex-trade unionists in how to negotiate with municipalities' employees, as much as the ex-banker on how to balance the books and modernize the running of the city's finances. Relatedly, neither PASOK nor the two other smaller parties that supported us, the left party Δημοκρατική Αριστερά and the center-right Δημοκρατική Συμπαθία, have they attempted to undermine our autonomy or shape our major decisions since we assumed office. Again, I believe, because of the negative impact of the crisis on the legitimacy of national political forces, these national parties have realized that they need to give us the space to address the problems of local localities with the greatest autonomy possible. Additionally, the fact that the central government undertakes relentless cost-cutting measures means that it cannot use patronage to suborn our identity and orientation. So as far as the people and the mandate is concerned, and from the point of view of Greece's ability to pursue and implement reforms, the local elections of 2010 have produced two complementary results. First, they have created greater diversity and expanded the skill set of the country's political elites. Second, the local elections have expanded the inclination at the local level for policy innovation by introducing greater autonomy to the country's political system. In terms of the impact of the city's finances in the way it produces and distributes public goods and services, I will go over the issues of the modernization of municipal finances, of regulation versus public works, and of having a municipal workforce dedicated to the commonwealth of the city of Thessaloniki versus the reproduction of a clientelistic machine. I have to underline this here, that the central idea of how the municipality operates is that the municipality is not an entrepreneur. It will open all doors, it will give chances to entrepreneurs, but it's not an entrepreneur itself. We inherited a municipality made in financial scandal, with key municipal personnel and the ex-general secretary being imprisoned or under criminal prosecution, and the lack of basic financial management competency which enabled fraud to take place. Consequently, we have launched a financial and legal due diligence process, a first in Greek local government, and we have introduced developed financial management systems as well as other essentials of proper management and accounting for resources. Warehousing control, safeguards to control rigged bidding, as well as control of the municipality's garbage fleet, its components management and fuel control. The scarcity of financial resources has legitimized all these efforts in what is essentially basic good stewardship of public funds and resources. The wide public awareness that every euro counts has underlined our efforts as much as the fact that our predecessors represented the kind of management of public affairs that is widely recognized to have led the country to bankruptcy. If I might relate these efforts with my previous comment on the renewal of our political personnel, our efforts in that direction have been successful precisely because they have been led and overseen by political leaders, deputy mayors, with wide and long experience in the private sector and exposure to modern management tools. Second, during our election campaign and being well aware that we would operate, if we were to win, under severe financial constraints, we explicitly said that we would not undertake major public works, but we would focus on regulatory measures. I believe that this is itself a conceptual breakthrough in terms of the validation of the concept of the reform process itself. Reform, at the end of the day, is an abstraction which is purported to have a desirable impact manifested in, eventually, material terms. In the characteristic political culture that is the hallmark of Greece and of countries like Greece, only money counts in politics, which is to say the distribution of the spoils of political power. We, on the contrary, have said that regulatory action, and by that I mean either the enforcement of existing regulations or the introduction and implementation of new regulations, can create value and welfare for the citizens of the city. Take, for instance, public space. We cannot improve public space through a massive public works program. Yet, the fact of the matter is that public space has been progressively degraded in Thessaloniki by its illegal appropriation for private gain, particularly by the retail and entertainment industry. By enforcing regulation, which we can do through political will and the effective deployment of our manpower, we can open our public space by declutter from illegal advertisement, beautify it and render it back to the average citizen. This is particularly critical today when the loss of private income has made citizens even more reliant on public space for their entertainment. I repeat that it is the lack of money that has made it compelling for us to create a record for public action through political will and the relevant regulatory practice. That in turn has illuminated to the citizens of Thessaloniki the fact that for genuine public welfare, the availability of resources is a critical but not sufficient component. A corrupt or indifferent administration, no matter how much material resources it commands, will fail to provide for the public good, and when that happens, only significant wealth can allow a citizen to avoid the negative consequences of public failure. Third, we have eliminated grossly inflated overpay in our key activity of garbage collection. Historically, and not and because garbage collection has been critical to the political survival of municipal leaderships, a couple of politicians, managers, and senior workers had created ever-increasing overtime compensation structures, which were passed on to the city rate payers. Bear in mind that the garbage collection rates are hypothetical. They can only be used for garbage collection. This hypothecation meant that this garbage would create a closed system whereby the ever-increasing rates would sustain even increasing take-home pay. This also had the electoral benefits, as people at garbage collection would be hired by mostly the second district of Thessaloniki, and whoever politician led the garbage collection service would also get a powerful boost electorally. By paying only for real overtime and paying it to those employees who really have done the overtime, we have managed to drastically reduce costs in garbage collection, and that in turn has enabled us to cut city rates this week by 7%, providing relief to the ratepayers at the time of desperate need. Fourth, and this relates to the totality of our workforce, we have hired an outside consultant so that we can, I'm not going to say modernize human resources management, for the simple reason that such management never existed in the first place, but so that we can deal with personnel structures, advancement, and processes in a systematic way. It is no secret that the Greek political system, closely intertwined with the civil service, never really cared for the professional management, organization of state employees, whether at the local or central level. We do care, and we care passionately. We simply believe that by thus caring for our people, we can liberate tremendous potential that inheres in them and thus create better public goods and services. We also think that this reorganization effort is vastly to the interest of the civil servants themselves, whether at the municipality or elsewhere. We all know that the country will not be able to increase the salaries in real terms of its civil servants in the medium term, while opportunities for corruption and graft will also be severely constrained in the future. This means that the only way that the standards of living of our civil servants can be maintained, and in critical areas even be improved, is for the quality of service itself to be dramatically improved. After all, who consumes public goods and services? Lower and middle income citizens do, and civil servants, by definition, belong to this segment. Moving to the third theme of my talk, local wealth and creation and national coalitions, I want to underline that Greece's lack of reform success in the recent decades had a lot to do with the interaction between local and national stakeholders. Across all levels and in all activities, local and national elites coordinated so that they could maximize income and influence through a privileged and usually corrupt relationship with the state. Non-meritocratic appointments in key institutions for the success of the city, such as hospitals, universities, port authorities, and the national fair. Leadership turnover and thus discontinuity due to changes in government and to local affiliations with either one or two major parties. Lack of transparency in purchases of goods and services, and thus misallocation of resources and some power performances. Hostility to any coherent national reform effort at the local level, precisely so that these local relationships of privilege, which by the way would sustain and nourish national party machines, would not be discontinued or disrupted. Naturally, as long as the national state was solvent, as long as it could borrow massively in the Greek case, as such a system could not on its own generate the wealth creation necessary to finance it, a city like Thessaloniki could survive and even increase its wealth. That is why, prior to the onset of the crisis in 2008, we were actually in a reasonably good shape despite the deindustrialization of northern Greece and the fact that shipping, finance, telecoms, and all other key services sectors of the mostly service-oriented Greek economy were headquartered in Athens. Now that the national state has gone bankrupt, however, there is very little to sustain local demand in a city like Thessaloniki. In practical terms, this means that the local political leadership, people like us, should execute a 180-degree turn. From being like the link between local and national vested interests sustained by institutional immobility, we have to become the link between national and local reform efforts. And primarily, those reforms reform efforts that can increase the city's capacity for wealth creation. How have I turned this perspective into action as Mayor of Thessaloniki? I have taken the lead locally in supporting Minister of Education Diamandopoulos' reform of higher education by being the first signatory of a petition declaring support of her legislative initiative, together with close to 100 prominent citizens of Thessaloniki. This has brought me into a very direct, very public clash, which created nationwide headlines with the academic establishment and university authorities of Thessaloniki. Why did I take the trouble and the political risk to take such a public stand? Because I believe that the minister's reform has the potential to internationalize higher education in Thessaloniki, improve the capacity of higher education to link up to the local economy via R&D and the creation of an employable and knowledgeable. In plain, even brutal language, higher education reform is indispensable to the medium to long-term ability of Greece's second largest city to feed itself. Shorter term, we are aggressively promoting Thessaloniki as a tourist destination, particularly in the region, despite opposition from narrow nationalistic voices. I am determined, in order to achieve this goal, to promote to all potential visitors the city's diverse historical legacy, which is not only Greek and Christian Orthodox, but also Jewish, Ottoman, and Church. This also involves a clash with a powerful political and institutional nexus involving church officials and local national political forces, a nexus that has shaped patronage networks in northern Greece, and in Thessaloniki in particular, at least since the end of the Greek Civil War. Again, as with university reform, I will not let that nexus standing in the way of Thessaloniki monetizing the tremendous historical asset that it has, an asset that can enable it to profitably interact with the key international constitutions and culture. More precisely, but as importantly, from the perspective of attracting tourism in northern Greece, I am determined to focus on two domains ahead of the next tourist season. In collaboration with other mayors from coastal cities that are deepened in the cruise ship industry, I'll strongly push for the effective lifting of cabotage so that Thessaloniki can attract a maximum of cruise ship visitors and also survive to become a home port destination for cruise ships. Again, in alignment with other Greek cities that host state museums and major archaeological sites, I want to promote a comprehensive agenda of reform of the governance of museums and sites, reform that would facilitate private donations for the upgrade of these sites, secure convenient opening hours, improve shop and restaurant facilities, and renew the curatorial mission of these institutions. In other words, I will work on both ends of the equation, both improving this showcasing of our legacy so that we can attract more visitors and facilitate the means, whether cruise ships, airliners, and the like, via which visitors will be able to visit our city. I have also added my voice in a speech a few weeks ago to those arguing for a major overhaul of our health sector. This overhaul is critical both for the welfare of the inhabitants of Thessaloniki, but also in order to attract patients from the region to our city, and this way to build up the health sector as a major contributor to the local economy. This overhaul requires first the institution of better supervision over medical practice, over both state and private hospitals, and or international accreditation of medical excellence by the city's major hospitals. Only such supervision can advance and disseminate medical practice in Thessaloniki, as well as attract medical visitors to our city from the outside. Second, the Ministry of Health should not procrastinate in providing licensing to major private hospitals which want to invest in novel medical treatments to the extent that their applications are medically and managerially sound. Third, changes should take place in the overall context of charitable giving in Greece so that the non-profit hospitals could become a critical pillar of medical provision, practice and innovation in Thessaloniki and northern Greece at large. Education, tourism, health, and I mention my initiatives in three fronts, not because they are an exhaustive list, although they are certainly top priorities in terms of my personal advocacy as Mayor of Thessaloniki, but because they are indicative of where local leaderships in Greece today can make a critical contribution to the creation of winning reform alliances across the nation, alliances which in turn make a sizable contribution to the success of local economies and of the national economy in total. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, local political leaderships in Greece were themselves major contributory causes to the lack of reform in Greece and thus to the resulting bankruptcy of the country. As managers of public resources, as managers of public employees, as providers of public goods and services, as stakeholders of the local national nexus that underpin the Greek system, they have a lot to account for. However, the crisis that has hit Greece and the bankruptcy of the central government has renewed the leadership class of many key cities in Greece, the capital and second largest city, Thessaloniki, being the two most prominent examples. I cannot speak of others, but I strongly believe the local leaderships, not only Thessaloniki, but also in Greece, have already demonstrated pragmatism and integrity in the way they are discharging their public mission. We have already shown that we can pursue our mandate by cutting back on waste and corruption, by simply enforcing the law and thus restoring critical public goods such as public space, and by introducing human resources management in local administration. And we have ourselves become major forces of reform and change in Greece at the national level, not least because that we recognize that only such reforms, now that the central government has bankrupted itself, can meet the material aspirations of our own inhabitants. Last but not least, we have engaged in these tasks in the way that I have described them to you because a sufficient number of our fellow citizens a year ago decided that our city's leadership ranks must be renewed and that business as usual simply won't do anymore. Thank you.
After that, you said it all, Mr. Mayor. But seriously, let me now invite our IT staff to prepare a video clip that we produced with the greetings from the president of Anatolia and the American College of Thessaloniki, Dr. Hans Giesecke.
Greetings, I'm Hans Giesecke, president of Anatolia College and the American College of Thessaloniki. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this special program this afternoon called Political Reform in Greece in Comparative Perspective. This is a key part of our overarching initiative we call Learning in Action, and we're spelling the word action with the letters A-C-T. The aim of this overall initiative is to engage students, professors, all of those in our teaching area, and research in off-campus activities involving enterprises, organizations, and the community. We want to enrich our students' experiences and also contribute to the finding of solutions, giving ACT much more exposure for the excellent work it already does in the community and for the more we will do in the future. Of course, this also relates to the establishment of the Michael and Kitty Dukakis Center in Public and Humanitarian Service at ACT. We believe this will be one of the primary ways of relating ACT to its host community of Thessaloniki in the future, and we look forward to your personal involvement in this exciting new venture. Thanks for being with us today.
Next, I'd like to call upon my good friend and partner, Dr. Athan Anastasakis of the Southeast European Studies at Oxford program, partnership that we've had now for 3 years here. I'd like to thank him for co-sponsoring the event and welcome back to Thessaloniki. Athan, would you say a few words of welcome also, please?
Thank you, David, and welcome to the conference. It's a great pleasure to be here as always. Now I'm a regular guest in this city, so for me it's like a home, and thanks to David and to other colleagues from ACT. We've had a very fruitful and prosperous cooperation in the context of various events, activities, and summer courses. And when David and I were discussing the organization and the happening of this conference, who could have imagined? I mean, David was worried that maybe we would be disrupted by riots or things like that. But now this is even more exciting because we are kind of the background of this conference is about developments that are running in such a fast pace that it provides definitely a background to our discussion on political reform. And under different circumstances, I mean, that would have been a normal conference. I've been in the academic and policy-making environment for quite a long time, and I remember having these discussions and conferences in the past. But this time, it's like so urgent with what's happening. It's like this is the product of a crisis now, and we just have to have this discussion. And that's a very interesting program, and it's very good that we have all these high-quality people here to discuss this topic. And I would very much like to thank David for providing this space for us here. I would also like to thank the mayor, because as your city's anniversary is next year for the 100 years, our anniversary at CSOX as a center of Southeast European Studies is also the 10th anniversary in Oxford, and we very much look forward, of course, to cooperating further with you, because we have already started this in our conference in Istanbul a month ago, and also with part of your staff, of course, that we've been working very closely. So look forward to cooperating with you in the future, because Thessaloniki for us in Oxford is a very important city academically, because this is for us a center in order to be able to understand the region better. And through ACT we've managed to come closer to Thessaloniki, and that model also is to be used with other cities like Istanbul or Belgrade for us in the future. So I wish everybody here a constructive conference with lots of discussions and interesting points that we expect you to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anton. I'll take a moment to explain a little bit about the conference and the Dukakis Center, and then we'll begin with our first panel. Perhaps some of you know a little bit about the prehistory of our center. We began life in 1999, precisely September of 1999, as an endowed chair, the Michael S. Dukakis Chair in Public Policy and Service, under which auspices we have organized more than 120 public events on and off the campus of Anatolia and the American College of Thessaloniki. More recently, as we had been engaging our students at the American College of Thessaloniki, young people from Greece, from countries in Southeast Europe, from throughout the United States, students, American and foreign students studying at American universities who choose to come to ACT to spend a semester or academic year and study abroad. We had been encouraging these young people to take public and community service initiatives in the city. This past year we did a project in which we helped rebuild a school for Roma youth outside the city. A year prior to that, we did the Recycle Monster project, where we did a major event on Aristotle Square, meant to help people understand the benefits of recycling, of respecting the environment. Given these kinds of activities, we thought that the time had perhaps come to modify the status of what had initially been an endowed chair, and to transform that into a full-fledged academic center. And this now is the Michael and Kitty Dukakis Center for Public and Humanitarian Service, which serves as the administrative home of an undergraduate program in international relations, an internationally recognized undergraduate program in international relations, as the umbrella for a whole range of activities and events in Thessaloniki and eventually outside the city as well. And then finally also as the, let's say, incubator for inspiring young people to take an active interest in public affairs, not merely to be skeptical or to be disenfranchised, but try to find things that they could do to make a difference in their community. Let me tell you briefly now about the scope of this particular event. which we've been discussing with Athan Anastasakis for just about a year. We had initially been concerned to try to move our base of operations from the city on the hill, so to speak, Anatolia, the lovely suburban wooded campus that we have, into the city where we could reach out a little bit more effectively to our fellow citizens. And we had thought that we could also celebrate two major milestones in the history of our institution: the 125th anniversary of the founding of Anatolia College, and the 30th anniversary of the founding of the American College of Thessaloniki. This, in essence, is what we first thought about. And I had been ruminating with Athan about the feasibility of having a conference on political reform in Greece 1 year ago. And one had thought, with the initial efforts of the current Greek government in concert with their partners in Brussels and the European Union, that what has become really a crucial crisis, I think, in the history of the Hellenic Republic probably wouldn't have been so serious. A year ago, we didn't think that we would have such problems, and maybe the time would be right for this kind of academic conference to which Athan alluded. Well, here we are. And the climate is much different, but I think that the topic is still quite germane. Some of the speakers here are previous lecturers in our Dukakis seminar series. Some of you I have been advised by close friends and colleagues to invite. Some of you I've seen on TV, or some of you I've read in various media here. And we thought, the organizing committee, that it would be interesting to bring a variety of people from outside Thessaloniki, from perhaps within Greece, but more importantly from abroad, into Thessaloniki to talk about the topic. That's why you are here individually. I'll mention that the Ombudsman, Nikiforos Diamandouros, gave one of the first lectures of the Dukakis Chair series in October of 2000. So welcome back, Mr. Ombudsman. Now, I want to say just one word more about the format of the event. We aim for this to be as interactive as possible. I want to say we have simultaneous translation for those of you who have difficulty with English or with Greek, and I suppose a certain number of our students from abroad here in the room will probably want to get the headsets when we do one or more sessions in Greek. But I think that a good number of us, if not all, are fairly comfortable with English, and we hope that in the way we actually floor manage the symposium, that will encourage as much discussion and feedback from the audience as is possible. Not merely to come up and ask a question, but to raise a point, maybe to object to something. There's a large number of people here, but I don't think that means we have to be disorderly about the way we conduct our business. We earnestly hope that you will say what you have to say, share your thoughts, and then listen to what your fellow citizens have to say as well. Very briefly, to close out this round of thoughts, I want to mention thanks to a certain number of my colleagues and friends who have been behind the efforts here to organize the symposium. I'll start with Rania Sarmatyan and the Public Relations and Development Office, Maria Bibu, Theodore Papanestros in the Marketing and Media Relations Department, Vasilis Karkavounas and all the guys at IT who came valiantly to try to set us up yesterday. We have a good number of volunteers from the American College of Thessaloniki and from the IB program at Anatolia. And I mentioned, by the looks of it, we have a certain number of study abroad students from the United States, including students in a special pre-freshman program that we run in collaboration with Northeastern University in Boston. Two people I'd like to single out: my managerial and research assistant, Pendalis Raphael, and Stelios Kelaiditis, and many of you conferees have had more dealings with him and with me. And I'd like to mention my thanks to the person who probably worked as hard as anyone, and has certainly worked harder than anyone in the last 3 years. My wife, Fotini Estrati, listener. Thank you, Fotini, for all your efforts over all the years. We celebrated her birthday yesterday, and we'll have a big party downstairs when the conference is over. You forgive my emotion. Now we're ready to move on to the first formal session, which will be a public interview by radio journalist Marina Rigou of Flash 96 Radio in Athens, with Takis Theodoropoulos, a well-known author and essayist, whose essay called Ipo to Miden is kind of the inspiration of this session. It'll take us just a moment to floor manage, and then we'll begin the session. So I'll call my speakers to the floor.
Νομίζω ότι μπορούμε να ξεκινήσουμε σιγά σιγά, αφού λύθηκαν και τα τεχνικά ζητήματα για απόψε. Καταρχάς θα ήθελα να σας ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολύ που βρίσκεστε σήμερα εδώ, όλοι εσείς, για αυτό το διεθνές συμπόσιο. Ένα συμπόσιο που γίνεται για τρίτη φορά, αν δεν κάνω λάθος, σε αυτή του τη διάσταση. Θα ήθελα επίσης να ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολύ τον κύριο Τάκη Θεοδωρόπουλο, ο οποίος βρίσκεται εδώ κοντά μας, για να ξεκινήσουμε αυτή την συνεδρία, την απόψινή συνεδρία, βάζοντας τα θέματα, θα έλεγα, κάπου από την αρχή. Αφορμή, όπως ακούσαμε και προηγουμένως, ένα βιβλίο. Το βιβλίο με τον τίτλο «Υπό το μηδέν». Και βεβαίως ένας αναγνώστης, ο οποίος βλέπει αυτόν τον τίτλο, ξέρει περίπου γιατί μιλάει το βιβλίο αυτό, είναι για το πώς φτάσαμε σήμερα σε αυτή την κρίση, η θεματική του. Ο τίτλος όμως, όπως καταλαβαίνετε, τρομάζει εξ αρχής, είναι υπό το μηδέν, έτσι. Θα ήθελα επίσης να επισημάνω ότι, όπως και οι προηγούμενοι ομιλητές επισήμαναν, η στιγμή που γίνεται αυτό το συμπόσιο είναι πραγματικά καθοριστική και κρίσιμη για τη χώρα μας και για την Ευρώπη. Βρεθήκαμε σε ένα σταυροδρόμι, αλλάξαμε πράγματα, μια Ευρώπη που προσπάθησε με μεγάλη αγωνία να φτάσει σε μία σύνοδο κορυφής, η οποία έγιναν 2 σύνοδοι κορυφής, και να προσπαθήσει να λύσει μία κρίση η οποία έχει επηρεάσει ολόκληρο τον κόσμο, την κρίση αυτή της Ευρωζώνης, και εμείς για μία ακόμη φορά ήμασταν διαφορετικοί. Το λέω έτσι. Θα μας τα πει καλύτερα, νομίζω, ο κύριος Θεοδωρόπουλος. Και θα ξεκινούσα από το ερώτημα, γιατί αυτός ο τίτλος...
Είμαστε διαφορετικοί.
Ας ξεκινήσουμε λοιπόν, ναι. Το ερώτημα θα ήταν το πρώτο μηδέν τόσο χάλια.
Κοιτάξτε, το βιβλίο αυτό, όπως ξέρετε, το έχω γράψει, αποτελείται από 4 κείμενα. Το ένα είναι αυτό που αναφέρατε, το δικό μου. Το άλλο είναι του Πέτρου Μάρκαρη, του συγγραφέα. Το τρίτο είναι του Πάσχου Πανδραβέλη, του δημοσιογράφου. Και το τέταρτο του Βασίλη Παπαβασιλείου, του σκηνοθέτη. Είναι 4 διαφορετικές οπτικές. Το λέω αυτό διότι χθες το βράδυ συζητούσαμε με τον Πέτρο Μάρκαρη και λέγαμε αν το φέτος, αν γράψουμε, τι τίτλο θα του βάζαμε. Παίζουμε ανάμεσα στο υπέδαφος και η γοητεία του βυθού. Κάπου εκεί ανάμεσα στα δύο. Δεν ξέρω τι μας ταιριάζει καλύτερα.
Νομίζω ότι οι εξελίξεις θα το δείξουν αυτό. Οπότε θα έχετε. Είναι και αυτές οι εξελίξεις, οπότε νομίζω θα έχετε πολλές επιλογές.
Εντάξει, νομίζω ότι εγώ αυτό που. Εντάξει, δεν θα μιλήσω για οικονομικά, διότι είναι άσχετο για οικονομικά. Εξάλλου, όλος ο κόσμος μιλάει για οικονομικά σήμερα, οπότε μια άποψη παραπάνω.
Νομίζω ότι για πρώτη φορά μάθαμε όρους που δεν είχαμε ακούσει ποτέ στη ζωή μας. Αυτά τα swap, CDS.
Και επειδή έχουμε και μια τάση ως κοινωνία να είμαστε μονοθεματικοί, δηλαδή αναδιετία πέφτουμε πάνω σε ένα θέμα και δεν υπάρχει τίποτα άλλο γύρω μας παρά μόνο αυτό. Αυτό νομίζω ότι είναι μέρος της ασφυξίας που ζούμε. Αλλά εγώ πιστεύω ότι αυτή τη στιγμή ζούμε μια ιστορία για την οποία δουλέψαμε πάρα πολύ. Δεν δουλέψαμε μόνο εμείς, οι Έλληνες δηλαδή, δουλέψαμε πάρα πολύ, εργαστήκαμε με συνέπεια για να φτάσουμε εδώ που φτάσαμε. Και δεν αναφέρομαι βέβαια κυρίως στη σχέση μας με την υπόλοιπη Ευρώπη. Έτσι. Θεωρώ ότι ένα από τα βασικά προβλήματα που έχουμε ως κοινωνία είναι ότι ποτέ δεν συζητήσαμε δημόσια και σοβαρά γιατί θέλουμε να ενταχθούμε σε αυτή τη μεγάλη κοινωνία των εθνών, τι σημαίνει αυτό για μας, τι δικαιώματα έχουμε από αυτό και τι υποχρεώσεις έχουμε. Αυτό πιστεύω ότι είναι ένα πρόβλημα το οποίο μέχρι τώρα το περνούσαμε λίγος πολύ κάτω από το τραπέζι, όπως συνηθίζουμε να περνάμε πάρα πολλά πράγματα. Αυτό είναι ένα μέρος της ιδιαιτερότητάς μας, ένα ιδιαίτερο χαρακτηριστικό. Το 1979 μπήκαμε στην ΕΟΚ, υπεγράφει η συνθήκη ένταξης στην ΕΟΚ. Ποτέ δεν συζητήθηκε δημόσια για ποιο λόγο έγινε αυτό. Το 1981 οι δυνάμεις που κερδίζουν τις εκλογές σαρωτικά είναι στη συντριπτική τους πλειοψηφία αντιευρωπαϊκές. Παρ' όλα αυτά μένουμε στην Ευρώπη και παρ' όλα αυτά εξακολουθούμε να συζητάμε, να μην ξέρουμε γιατί μείναμε στην Ευρώπη και φτάνουμε σήμερα βέβαια όπου όσο καιρό η Ευρώπη ακολουθούσε μια ανωδική πορεία προς τη συγκρότησή της σε πολιτικό οργανισμό, δεν είχαμε πρόβλημα, έτσι, διότι ήμασταν κι εμείς ένα μικρό κομματάκι αυτού του τεράστιου οικοδομήματος που χτιζότανε και ο τρόπος βέβαια που χτίστηκε και αυτό το οικοδόμημα είναι προβληματικός, θα το πω μετά αυτό. Όταν άρχισαν να δημιουργούνται οι πρώτοι κλειδονισμοί και όταν άρχισε αυτό το οικοδόμημα να περνάει την πρώτη του υπαρξιακή κρίση, κάτι που ήταν αναμενόμενο και κατά τη γνώμη μου φυσιολογικό, διότι δεν έχουμε κανένα ιστορικό παράδειγμα όπου ένας πολιτικός οργανισμός χτίζεται με λουλούδια και δάφνες. Όλοι περνάνε μέσα από κρίσεις και είναι οι κρίσεις που επιτρέπουν κυρίως στους μεγάλους πολιτικούς οργανισμούς να μπορέσουν να υποδομηθούν. Εμείς απλώς πανικοβληθήκαμε, τα χάσαμε, διότι δεν ξέραμε τι να πούμε. Εγώ λέω, για να ολοκληρώσω την άποψή μου με μια κάπως προκλητική θέση, η θέση μας μέχρι τώρα, διότι οποιονδήποτε, αν βγούμε έξω και ρωτήσουμε, το εν τέλει ερώτημα είναι και σε τι μπορεί να μου χρησιμεύσει η Ευρώπη. Ας φύγουμε από τα ευρώ και τα λοιπά, έτσι, σε τι μπορεί να μου χρησιμεύσει η Ευρώπη. Και το ερώτημα που θέτω εγώ στον εαυτό μου είναι σε τι χρησιμεύσε η Ελλάδα στην Ευρώπη. Δηλαδή, μέσα σε αυτά τα 30 χρόνια, πώς η Ελλάδα συμμετείχε στον ευρωπαϊκό διάλογο συγκρότησης αυτού του μεγάλου οργανισμού. Αν δείτε την πολιτική παρουσία στην Ευρώπη, συνίσταται σε 3 μεγάλα θέματα. Φέρτε μας πίσω τα Ελγίνια, μη λέτε τους ακατονόμαστους τους διπλανούς Μακεδονία και ένα βέτο για την Τουρκία μέχρι που δεν χρειάζονταν πια να το βάζουμε στο βέτο, το βάλανε αυτοί που ήθελαν από την αρχή να το βάλουν. Αυτά τα 3. Δεν είχαμε ποτέ μια σοβαρή παρέμβαση ως μικρή χώρα. Εντάξει, είμαστε μια μικρή χώρα. Μια σοβαρή παρέμβαση. Και αυτό γιατί, διότι στην πραγματικότητα δεν μας αφορούσε το θέμα. Δεν μας αφορούσε το θέμα ως κοινωνία. Τώρα τα λέω λίγο σχηματικά, εννοείται ότι υπάρχουν αποχρώσεις, εννοείται ότι δεν ισχύει αυτό κατά 100%, εννοείται ότι υπάρχουν εξαιρέσεις κτλ.
Φυσικά, αλλά είναι μια γενική προσέγγιση του προβλήματος αυτού. 2 προβλήματα. Το ένα, ότι πολλές φορές είδαμε την Ευρώπη ουσιαστικά μια πηγή χρημάτων χωρίς να υπάρχει μια ανταπόδοση απέναντι σε αυτόν τον θεσμό που, όπως είπατε, είναι ένας πολιτικός οργανισμός, ο οποίος όμως δεν είδε ποτέ πολιτικά την ύπαρξή του με μια έννοια. Δηλαδή ξεκίνησε με μια αδυναμία. Ναι, μεν αυτό ήταν ένα όραμα η Ευρώπη που ξεκίνησε να έχει φτάσει σε 15 χώρες μέλη, μετά όμως έφτασε να έχει 27 χώρες μέλη. Μια πολύ μεγάλη δυσκολία προφανώς σε ένα τέτοιο εγχείρημα να μπορέσει να υπάρξει η εμβάθυνση, υπήρξε μια γρήγορη.
Αυτό που λέτε, ναι, είναι η πλευρά η ευρωπαϊκή του προβλήματος. Έτσι,
γιατί έχουμε 2 διαστάσεις αυτό το πρόβλημα.
Εντάξει, θεωρώ ότι και πάλι δεν είμαι. Ξέρετε, αυτό που είπατε για τα χρήματα, εντάξει, δεν είναι ότι είμαστε τίποτε περίεργοι άνθρωποι. Είναι πάρα πολύ απλό. Όταν λέω ότι δεν καταλάβαμε ποτέ στην πραγματικότητα ως κοινωνία γιατί θέλουμε αυτή την ένταξη, που εγώ από την αρχή έλεγα επιτέλους βρήκαμε το φυσικό μας χώρο, βρήκαμε το ζωτικό πολιτισμικό μας χώρο, αυτόν στον οποίο προσβλέπαμε από το 1832, από τότε που υπεγράφει η συνθήκη του Λονδίνου και αναγνωρίστηκε το ελληνικό κράτος ως οντότητα, τον βρήκαμε αυτό το φυσικό ζωτικό μας χώρο, αλλά από εκεί και πέρα πρέπει να συνειδητοποιήσουμε τι θα κάνουμε από εδώ και πέρα.
Νομίζω όμως ότι αυτό είναι ένα σημείο που έχει με ιδιαίτερη σημασία. Εσείς βρήκατε το φυσικό σας χώρο, πολλοί όμως συμπολίτες μας διαφωνούν ως προς αυτό. Ακόμα και σήμερα, τόσα χρόνια μετά την ένταξή μας στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, είμαστε εμείς και είναι οι άλλοι. Είναι η Ευρώπη. Μιλάμε για την Ευρώπη σαν να είναι κάτι πολύ μακρινό.
Αυτό που λέτε έχει δύο διαστάσεις. Η μία είναι ότι πολλοί διαφωνούν, αλλά και πάρα πολλοί Γάλλοι διαφωνούν. Έτσι, και πάρα πολλοί Ιταλοί διαφωνούν με την Ευρώπη. Βέβαια, ο Γάλλος, ο οποίος διαφωνεί με την Ευρώπη και την ευρώ, σκέφτεται ότι θα ξαναγυρίσει πίσω στο γαλλικό φράγκο. Το οποίο γαλλικό φράγκο γνωστό δεν είχε ουδέμια σχέση με την ελληνική δραχμή. Έτσι. Να πω, μιλάμε για δύο εντελώς διαφορετικά πράγματα. Ή σκέφτεται ότι θα γυρίσει σε μια Γαλλία του Ντεγκόλ, η οποία Γαλλία του Ντεγκόλ δεν είχε καμία σχέση με την Ελλάδα της δεκαετίας του 60. Έτσι. Λοιπόν, είναι δύο διαφορετικά πράγματα. Το ένα είναι ότι μπορεί να έχεις χιλιάδες ερωτήματα και χιλιάδες να προβληματίζεσαι από τον τρόπο με τον οποίο συγκροτήθηκε αυτή η μεγάλη πολιτική ένωση, και είναι τελείως διαφορετικό να λες εμείς και η Ευρώπη. Είναι δύο τελείως διαφορετικές τάσεις. Γιατί και εγώ έχω πολλά ερωτήματα. Και το βασικό μου ερώτημα στην υπαρξιακή κρίση που περνάει η Ευρώπη σήμερα είναι ότι, εντάξει, έφτασε να φτιάξουν. Καταρχάς πιστεύω ότι η ΕΟΚ με τον πολύ σεμνό τίτλο Ευρωπαϊκή Οικονομική Κοινότητα ήταν πολύ πιο πολιτική από τη σημερινή Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Έτσι, και γι' αυτό βάλαμε και την Ελλάδα μέσα. Εντάξει, δεν μας αυτό, κατά τη γνώμη μου. Αλλά το θέμα είναι ότι όταν φτιάχτηκε η Ευρώπη, φτιάχτηκε πάτησε σε δύο πολιτικούς πυλώνες. Ο ένας ήταν τα ερείπια του Δευτέρου Παγκοσμίου Πολέμου, έτσι, ποτέ πια δεν θέλουμε αυτό. Ο δεύτερος ήταν η κοινοβουλευτική δημοκρατία. Τα σύνορά της ήταν αυστηρά προδιαγεγραμμένα, υπήρχε το ανατολικό μπλοκ από την άλλη μεριά, και εδώ πέρα ήταν οι λεγόμενες δυτικές δημοκρατίες. Όταν κατέρευσε το τείχος του Βερολίνου, άρχισαν τα πρώτα υπαρξιακά προβλήματα. Διότι ο ένας από τους δύο πολιτικούς πυλώνες έπαψε πλέον να υπάρχει ως ισχυρός συνεκτικός δεσμός. Αυτό το πράγμα απλώθηκε. Με αποτέλεσμα να γίνει αυτή η τσάτρα-πάτρα διεύρυνση που έγινε μέσα σε μια κατάσταση πανικού. Όταν στην Ευρώπη η Ευρώπη άρχισε να απομακρύνεται από τα ερείπια του Δεύτερου Παγκοσμίου Πολέμου, ο Δεύτερος Παγκόσμιος Πόλεμος πλέον να βρίσκει τη θέση του στα βιβλία της ιστορίας και όχι στις βιωματικές εμπειρίες και κυρίως των ηγετών της, ο δεύτερος πυλώνας πάλι άρχισε να παραπέει. Το θέμα είναι ότι έπρεπε και πρέπει η Ευρώπη να βρει μια προοπτική για το μέλλον της. Λοιπόν, εκεί πέρα πιστεύω ότι βρισκόμαστε σε αυτό το σημείο. Δηλαδή, αυτή τη στιγμή περνάμε μια κρίση η οποία έχει μια οικονομική επιφάνεια, αλλά έχει ένα βάθος υπαρξιακό πάρα πολύ σημαντικό.
Εξαιρετικά σημαντικό και σε σχέση με την Ευρώπη και σε σχέση φυσικά με τη δική μας τη χώρα, η οποία ανεξάρτητα από το πρόβλημα το μεγάλο της οικονομικής κρίσης που ξεκίνησε ήδη από το 2008 και έπληξε ολόκληρο τον κόσμο και όχι μόνο την Ευρώπη, ωστόσο μέσα από αυτή τη διαδικασία αναδύθηκαν τα προβλήματα της ελληνικής κοινωνίας και κυρίως του ελληνικού πολιτικού συστήματος. Τι ήταν αυτό λοιπόν που χαρακτήρισε τελικά τη χώρα μας όλα αυτά τα χρόνια μέχρι που φτάσαμε σήμερα εδώ για να συζητάμε το τι θα γίνει αύριο με ρυθμούς που πραγματικά δεν προλαβαίνουμε?
Καταρχάς, μίλησε και ο κύριος Δήμαρχος πριν και τα περιέγραψε ως εμπειρία στη θητεία του. Ξέρουμε ότι έχουμε ως συγκρότηση κρατική έχουμε ένα βασικό πρόβλημα. Έχουμε μιλάγαμε πριν για ιδιαιτερότητα, έχουμε μια ιδιαίτερη σχέση με το δημόσιο. Με αυτό το ο Λεβιάθαν τον οποίο κατασκευάσαμε και ο οποίος απορροφά και απορροφούσε επί δεκαετίες κάθε κοινωνική ενέργεια που παραγόταν σε αυτή τη χώρα, αυτό γιατί έγινε? Να πω, εντάξει, υπάρχουν πάρα πολλές ερμηνείες. Καταρχάς, ξέρουμε πάρα πολύ καλά ότι αυτό δεν είναι προϊόν κάποιας σοσιαλίζουσας νοοτροπίας. Σε αυτό συμμετείχαν όλες οι πολιτικές παρατάξεις, η καθεμία με τον τρόπο τους και η καθεμία με τις απόψεις της. Έτσι. Εγώ σκέφτομαι κάτι άλλο. Το 1844 στην Εθνοσυνέλευση ακούστηκε για πρώτη φορά στην Ελλάδα ο όρος μεγάλη ιδέα. Ξέρουμε τι ρόλο ιστορικό έπαιξε αυτή η μεγάλη ιδέα. Ξέρουμε επίσης γιατί ακούστηκε ο όρος αυτός. Με ποια ευκαιρία. Για το ποιοι θα διορίζονται στο δημόσιο. Είναι εντυπωσιακό. Το 1844 γίνεται η συζήτηση στην Εθνοσυνέλευση. Από τη μία είναι ο Παλαμίδης και ο Μακρυγιάννης που υποστηρίζουν ότι πρέπει να διορίζονται στο δημόσιο μόνο οι αυτόχθονες, οι προερχόμενοι από τις απελευθερωμένες περιοχές. Και από την άλλη είναι ο Κολέτης, ο οποίος υποστηρίζει ότι πρέπει να διορίζονται και οι ετερόχθονες και λέει για την μεγάλη ταύτην ιδέα του ελληνισμού επολεμήσαμε για τους απανταχού Έλληνας. Το θέμα όμως ήταν ποιοι θα διορίζονται στο δημόσιο. Όχι τι κράτος θα φτιάξουμε, αυτό που πήγε να κάνει ο Καποδίστριας, όχι τι θέλουμε από αυτό το κράτος, αλλά ποιοι θα διορίζονται σε αυτό. Αυτό λοιπόν δεν μπορεί εδώ. Όλο το πολιτικό υποδόμημα έχει στηθεί πάνω σε αυτό το εθνικό παράδειγμα. Το δημόσιο για μας δεν είναι θέμα οικονομικής διαχείρισης. Είναι θέμα εθνικού παραδείγματος.
Ουσιαστικά το πολιτικό σύστημα έχει θεμελιωθεί πάνω σε πελατειακές σχέσεις.
Κατά συνέπεια φτάνουμε σε αυτό που περιγράφεται. Δηλαδή, κατά συνέπεια φτάνουμε σε αυτό που λέμε πελατειακές σχέσεις. Κατά συνέπεια φτάνουμε, βέβαια, όταν έχεις έναν τόσο μεγάλο οργανισμό, ο οποίος είναι απαράγωγος και το ξέρει και ο ίδιος ότι είναι απαράγωγος, διότι δεν είναι εκεί για να παράγει, είναι εκεί για να υπάρχει. Αντλεί την ύπαρξή του, την αιτιολογία της ύπαρξής του από την ίδια του την ύπαρξη. Αυτός αναγκαστικά θα διαφθαρεί. Δεν υπάρχει θέμα. Δεν είναι ότι είναι κακοί οι άνθρωποι. Αυτό είναι από την ίδια του τη σύσταση. Βέβαια, άνθρωποι υπάρχουν, κακοί πάντα, δεν υπάρχει θέμα. Και ηλίθιοι πολύ. Το οποίο έχουμε την τάση να μην το μετράμε πια. Δεν μετράμε το ποσοστό της ηλιθιότητας στο δημόσιο βίο μας. Φτιάχνουμε διάφορες θεωρίες, ότι αυτός λέει αυτό επειδή σκέφτεται να κάνει και τίποτα. Το λέει επειδή είναι βλάξ.
Είναι βλάξ τελικά, όμως είναι μέσα από μια παιδεία που τελικά είναι μεταφορικό. Αλλά και η δική μου ερώτηση έχει τη μεταφορά. Δηλαδή, όταν κάποιον τελικά δεν τον έχεις βοηθήσει μέσα από την παιδεία να αναπτύξει μια συγκεκριμένη σκέψη, έτσι μπορεί να φαίνεται βλάξ εν τέλει ή να φέρεται με τον τρόπο που φέρετε σήμερα.
Κοιτάξτε, εγώ πιστεύω τώρα θίξατε μια άλλη πλευρά του ζητήματος, η οποία είναι πολύ σημαντική. Και πιστεύω ότι αυτή η πλευρά πάει και αυτή πάρα πολύ βαθιά, έτσι, αλλά για να τη δούμε μέσα στην ιστορική προοπτική της, θα πρέπει να παρασύρουμε πολλά στοιχεία στο πέρασμα. Αλλά πιστεύω ότι από το 1974 και δόθε, δηλαδή σε όλη την περίοδο της μεταπολίτευσης, το μεγάλο, ας το πω έγκλημα, εν πάση περιπτώσει, η μεγάλη εθνική μας ήττα ήταν η παιδεία. Δηλαδή, ιτηθήκαμε σε αυτό το τομέα πολύ πριν ιτηθούμε στην οικονομία, πολύ πριν ιτηθούμε και όλο αυτό που προσπαθώ να περιγράψω, ξεκινάει πιστεύω από εκεί. Όταν λέω παιδεία, τι εννοώ? Δεν εννοώ να ξέρεις πότε έγινε η μάχη του Μαραθώνα ή η ναυμαχία της Σαλαμές, αν και καλό θα ήταν να το ξέρεις βέβαια αυτό, αλλά αυτό είναι ας πούμε ότι είναι κάτι το οποίο το μαθαίνεις, ότι υπάρχει το Wikipedia και μπορεί να γκουγκλάρεις και να το βρεις. Παιδεία εννοώ καταρχάς μια αίσθηση, έτσι, σε πολύ απλά ελληνικά, σεβασμού απέναντι σε κάτι που σε ξεπερνάει. Ότι ζεις σε έναν κόσμο όπου υπάρχουν αξίες οι οποίες είναι ισχυρότερες από σένα, οι οποίες είναι ανώτερες από σένα και τις οποίες ή δυνατόν καλόν θα ήταν να ενστερνιστείς. Εάν δεν μπορείς να ενστερνιστείς, τουλάχιστον να ξέρεις ότι υπάρχουν. Τώρα, λοιπόν, αυτό το σύστημα κατέρευσε, οργανωμένα κατέρευσε. Δεν είναι μόνο ελληνικό το πρόβλημα. Έτσι. Πιστεύω ότι σε όλη την Ευρώπη το πρόβλημα υπάρχει. Αλλά βέβαια εδώ πέρα, επειδή είμαστε κατά κάποιο τρόπο και μια κοινωνία που ζει στο περιθώριο της Ευρώπης, στα σύνορα της Ευρώπης, το πρόβλημα εμφανίζεται με μεγαλύτερη έμφαση. Λοιπόν, αυτό κατέρευσε. Κατά συνέπεια, αυτό που κατέρευσε ήταν ολόκληρο το σύστημα το αξιακό της κοινωνίας, διότι η παιδεία τροφοδοτεί την κοινωνία με πολίτες. Δεν θα είχαμε λόγο να έχουμε υποχρεωτική εκπαίδευση αν δεν χρειαζόμασταν πολίτες, οι οποίοι να πάνε να ψηφίσουν στο δημοψήφισμα ναι ή όχι στην Ευρώπη, χωρίς να ξέρουν τι είναι η Ευρώπη. Γιατί πρώτα απ' όλα πρέπει να ξέρεις τι είναι η Ευρώπη για να πας να ψηφίσεις ναι ή όχι. Όταν λοιπόν όταν η πολιτική τάξη ποτέ δεν έχει φροντίσει να ανοίξει αυτό το ζήτημα για το ποια είναι η Ευρώπη, με ποιο δικαίωμα σου σε ρωτάει να απαντήσει το ερώτημα? είχαν αναλάβει εξ ολοκλήρου την ευθύνη. Και κάποια στιγμή όταν είδαν ότι δεν μπορούν, διότι δεν είναι ανευθυνοϊπεύθυνοι, την πετάνε στον δρόμο και λένε τώρα αποφασίστε εσείς. Αυτό το υπέροχο που είπε ο κύριος Καστανίδης, επιτέλους να αναλάβει ο λαός τις ευθύνες. Είναι καταπληκτικό αυτό για ένα πολιτικό ηγέτη. Επιτέλους να αναλάβει και ο ασθενής τις ευθύνες του. Δεν μπορώ να τον εγχειρίζω συνέχεια εγώ κύριε. Δεν είναι δυνατόν. Είναι εντυπωσιακό. Λοιπόν, το θέμα είναι, κατέρευσε όλο το, πιστεύω ότι κατέρευσε, δηλαδή οι λεπτομέρειες είναι πάρα πολλές και τις ξέρετε. Είναι εντυπωσιακό ότι έχει να υπογραφεί φύλλο ποιότητας στη μέση εκπαίδευση για εκπαιδευτικό από το 1980, το τελευταίο φύλλο ποιότητας. Αυτό μου το έχουν πει από το Σωματείο των εκπαιδευτικών της μέσης εκπαίδευσης.
Που ίσως αυτό είναι και το λιγότερο τελικά, υπό την έννοια του ότι η ουσιαστική παιδεία έχει χαθεί. Δεν μπορείς να έχεις multiple choice εξετάσεις.
Αυτό είναι το γενικότερο πρόβλημα της παιδείας. Εγώ θεωρώ, έτσι για να πω, αν θέλετε, επειδή μου αρέσει να προκαλώ λίγο για να είμαι και λίγο όχι απολύτως politically correct, εγώ θεωρώ ότι η μεγάλη αποψήλωση της παιδείας ξεκίνησε όταν ο Γιώργος Ράλης, ο Υπουργός της Παιδείας, Πρωθυπουργός, τότε, όχι, Υπουργός Παιδείας, κατήργησε τη διδασκαλία της καταρρεύουσας. Και όχι μόνο επειδή πιστεύω ότι δεν υπάρχει ελληνική γλώσσα χωρίς την καταρρεύουσα, έτσι, ακόμα και η ελληνική γλώσσα που μιλάμε σήμερα, αυτή η δημοτική που μιλάμε σήμερα δεν υπάρχει χωρίς την καταρρεύουσα, αλλά κατήργησε ακριβώς, μπήκε μέσα σε αυτή τη λογική ότι το παιδί δεν θα βασανιστεί για να φτάσει σε κάτι το οποίο δεν είναι μέσα στην καθημερινότητά του, δεν ανήκει μέσα στην προχειρότητα του απλώνω το χέρι μου και το πιάνω, αλλά χρειάζεται κόπο για να το φτάσω εκεί πέρα. Και βέβαια, εντάξει, απομάκρυνε τις νεότερες γενιές από μια ελληνική παιδεία των τελευταίων 50 ετών, όχι 2000, έτσι, δηλαδή από κείμενα τα οποία γράφτηκαν και κυρίως δημιούργησε την ψευδαίσθηση και κακή την πίστη, κατά τη γνώμη μου, την εποχή εκείνη, ότι και παραγνώρισε το γεγονός ότι η δημοτική φτιάχτηκε από ανθρώπους που μιλούσαν καθαρεύουσα. Έτσι. Ο Σεφέρης καθαρεύουσα είχε διδαχθεί. Δεν θα υπήρχε η ποίηση του Σεφέρη χωρίς τον απόϊχο της καθαρεύουσας από πίσω μας. Λοιπόν, αυτό τώρα θα μου πείτε μέσα στην κατάσταση που ζούμε σήμερα είναι μια αστεία λεπτομέρεια. Πλην όμως δεν πιστεύω ότι είναι τόσο αστεία, διότι αυτές είναι, αν θέλετε, οι πολιτιστικές συνιστώσεις της κρίσης που πιστεύω ότι. Και εξάλλου να σας πω και κάτι, εγώ έχω και την εξής εντύπωση, ότι όταν διαβάζει κανείς κείμενα της γενιάς του 30, των διανοητών της γενιάς του 30, οι οποίοι θεωρούνται και ελληνοκεντρικοί. Έτσι. Είναι κατά κάποιο τρόπο μια ελληνοκεντρική άποψη περί Ελλάδος. Πλην όμως βλέπεις ότι είναι άνθρωποι οι οποίοι είναι σε διαρκή συνομιλία με αυτό που γίνεται στην Ευρώπη. Σε αυτό απαντάν και εκεί πέρα απέναντι σε αυτό προσπαθούν να τοποθετηθούν οι ίδιοι. Αυτό το πράγμα είναι εντυπωσιακό, ότι από τη στιγμή που μπήκαμε στην Ευρώπη έσπασε. Αυτό το ενδιαφέρον, δηλαδή ότι όλο το ενδιαφέρον από τα πρώτα σκυρτήματα εθνικής συνείδησης στην Ελλάδα, ότι το βλέμμα ήταν στραμμένο προς τα εκεί, με όλα τα βαρύδια που κουβαλούσαμε μέσα μας, με όλες τις αναστολές, με όλες τους εσωτερικούς διχασμούς κτλ. Αλλά προς τα εκεί ήταν στραμμένο το βλέμμα. Αυτό το πράγμα από τη στιγμή που μπήκαμε στην Ευρώπη έσπασε. Τώρα ήταν ψυχολογική αντίδραση. Δέσαμε το γάιδαρό μας και ησυχάσαμε. Είχαμε και αυτό που είπατε πριν, το θέμα ότι, διότι όλο αυτό καταλήγει σε τι, ότι όταν δεν ξέρεις, έχεις ένα φίλο που είναι ο Ευρωπαίος φίλος, έτσι, ο τίτλος ταινίας, ο Ευρωπαίος φίλος, ο οποίος ξυπνάς μια ωραία πρωία και σου έχει βάλει 100.000 ευρώ στο λογαριασμό. Και τι καλό παιδί αυτός ο Ευρωπαίος φίλος. Πλην όμως δεν ξέρεις γιατί στα έχει βάλει, οπότε δεν ξέρεις και τι να τα κάνεις. Και αρχίζεις. Και τα μοιράζει, βάζεις και μερικά για τα γεράματα, δίνεις και στο φίλο στον Γιώργο και έτσι γίνεται η δουλειά. Αυτό τώρα είναι κάτι σχηματικό. Έτσι δεν μπορώ να πω, λέει εντελώς. Αλλά εν τέλει εκεί καταλήγει όμως το πρόβλημα. Σε αυτό το πάρα πολύ απλό.
Μα πολλές φορές μπορεί να είναι και λίγο χειρότερο. Δηλαδή έχεις βρει τα λεφτά εκεί, ξέρεις τι θα έπρεπε να τα έκανες, αλλά τα κάνεις κάτι διαφορετικό. Που είναι ίσως και.
Ναι, αυτό είναι η περίπτωση του δόλου, αλλά δεν πιστεύω ότι υπήρξε μόνο. Δεν ήταν μόνο θέμα δολιότητας. Ήταν θέμα καθαρά για να επανέλθουμε πάλι στο έλλειμμα της παιδείας. Διότι Εντάξει, ξέρουμε πάρα πολύ καλά ότι για τον Πορτογάλο και τον Ισπανό η έννοια Ευρώπη, η αντίληψη Ευρώπη είναι σχεδόν δεδομένη, γιατί έχει συμμετάσχει στην ευρωπαϊκή ιστορία. Για να μην μιλήσω για τη λατινογενή του γλώσσα, δεν θεωρεί, όπως ο Γάλλος δεν θεωρεί τον Γκιώτε ξένο συγγραφέα, είναι Γερμανός δηλαδή, είναι δικός του συγγραφέας. Ή ο Γερμανός δεν θεωρεί τον Βολτέρο ξένο διανοητή, είναι δικός του διανοητή. Για μας η Ευρώπη ήταν μια κατάκτηση. Ήταν μια κατάκτηση πορείας στο σύγχρονο κόσμο.
Για να μην μονοπολώ τις ερωτήσεις, θα ήθελα να σας προτείνω να παρέμβετε κι εσείς σε αυτή τη συζήτηση για να μπούμε σιγά σιγά στο κλίμα της συνεργασίας, αυτό ακριβώς που θα έπρεπε να είναι ένα συμπόσιο. Υπάρχει κάποιος που θα ήθελε να παρέμβει, να τοποθετηθεί? Παρακαλώ, ο κύριος.
Τον άκουσα πολύ προσεκτικά μια κριτική.
Το όνομά σας, αν θέλετε.
Ζουρδούμης λέγομαι, Πέτρος Ζουρδούμης. Άκουσα πολύ προσεκτικά μια κριτική σε διάφορα θέματα για μια Ελλάδα που δεν έχει σχεδόν τίποτα σωστό. Έχει μια άθλια παιδεία, έχει μια ακόμη αθλιότερη ενδεχομένως υγεία, μια πολύ κακή δημόσια διοίκηση, πολιτικό προσωπικό που ενδεχομένως είναι ανεπαρκές. Βρίσκεται σε μια Ευρώπη η οποία είναι οικοδομημένη λάθος. Το ερώτημά μου είναι το εξής. Προφανώς αυτό υπονοεί ότι χρειάζεται άμεσα μια πολιτική μεταρρύθμιση. Ενδεχομένως και στην Ευρώπη. Αλλά επειδή μας ενδιαφέρει κυρίως η Ελλάδα, θέλω να σας ρωτήσω το εξής. Εμπιστευόμαστε την πολιτική μεταρρύθμιση σε αυτούς που συνετέλεσαν στο να δημιουργηθούν όλα αυτά τα προβλήματα? Το δεύτερο μου ερώτημα είναι, πιστεύετε ότι ο λαός μπορεί να έχει την ωριμότητα να συμμετέχει σε αυτή, ή απλώς να παίζει ένα δευτερεύοντα ρόλο στη δημοκρατία? Και το τρίτο είναι αν θα μπορούσατε να μας δώσετε, με βάση τη δική σας αίσθηση, 2-3 παραδείγματα δραματικών αλλαγών που νομίζετε ότι πρέπει να γίνουν στην Ελλάδα και στην Ευρώπη για να ξεφύγουμε από αυτό το τέλμα.
Κοιτάξτε, αυτό μου ζητάτε να φτιάξω ένα πολιτικό πρόγραμμα. Εντάξει, όχι, καλά. Μου θυμίζει αυτό όταν μπήκε ο Ντεγκόλ στο Παρίσι που υπήρχε κάποιο πανό, κάποιος που έγραφε «Μόρο Πόμς, θάνατος τους ηλίθιους» και γυρνάει και του λέει «Βάσει το προζέ». Αυτό είναι λοιπόν. Έχετε δίκιο, εντάξει. Όχι, δεν πιστεύω ότι η πολιτική τάξη μπορεί να είναι μοχλός αυτής της μεταρρύθμισης. Αυτό εξάλλου, τώρα δεν λέω τίποτε πρωτότυπο, το διαπιστώνουμε δυστυχώς καθημερινά. Πιστεύω ότι είναι μέρος του προβλήματος και πιστεύω ότι το πρόβλημα που ζούμε αυτή τη στιγμή είναι ότι υπάρχει μια απόλυτη. Κοιτάξτε, η πολιτική τάξη, καλώς ή κακώς, είχε συνυπογράψει με την ελληνική κοινωνία ένα συμβόλαιο αναξιοπιστίας. Το είχαμε συνυπογράψει όλοι. Και είχαμε πει: ωραία, θα σας λέω αυτά, θα κάνουμε άλλα, θα πηγαίνω στην Ευρώπη, θα λέω άλλα, θα γυρνάω εδώ, θα λέω άλλα και γενικά θα γίνεται κάτι άλλο από αυτά που λέμε. Αυτό το ζήσαμε χρόνια. Όταν προχθές με ρωτούσε ένας Γερμανός δημοσιογράφος γιατί πιστεύω ότι ακολούθησε αυτά τα 2 χρόνια αυτή τη στάση ο Γιώργος Παπανδρέου. Του είπα γιατί αυτή τη δουλειά ξέρει να κάνει. Αυτό κάναμε πάντα. Πηγαίναμε, υπογράφαμε τη συνθήκη της Λισαβόνας, το Μάστριχτ, το ένα, το άλλο. Γυρνάγαμε εδώ, εντάξει, τα υπογράψαμε. Παιδιά, τελειώσαμε. Από τη στιγμή που ψηφίσαμε τους νόμους, τελειώσαμε. Δεν είναι δική μου δουλειά να τους εφαρμόσω. Αυτό είναι δουλειά της ελληνικής κοινωνίας. Πρέπει να αναλάβει την ευθύνη της επιτέλους και η ελληνική κοινωνία να εφαρμόσει τους νόμους. Λοιπόν, αυτό ξέρουν να κάνουν. Σίγουρα δεν μπορούν. Τώρα, από εκεί πέρα για το λαό. Εγώ πιστεύω, να σας πω, επειδή πιστεύω στη δημοκρατία και πιστεύω και στην κοινοβουλευτική δημοκρατία, δεν πιστεύω στην άμεση δημοκρατία, θεωρώ ότι όλα θα εξαρτηθούν από τη δυνατότητα της πολιτικής τάξης να αναπαραχθεί. Δηλαδή να ανακτήσει, όταν λέω της πολιτικής τάξης εννοώ εν γέννη, έτσι, ως έννοια, να ανακτήσει την αξιοπιστία της. Αλλιώς δεν μπορώ να δω πώς αλλιώς μπορεί να γίνει. Και αυτό το εννοώ σε πανευρωπαϊκό επίπεδο, έτσι, αλλά βέβαια όπως είπατε και εσείς ξεκινάμε από εμάς, γιατί αυτό που μας αφορά άμεσα είναι αυτό που μας σημαίνει εμάς.
Ο κύριος έχει ζητήσει το λόγο.
Γεια σας, είμαι μέσα στον λόγο. Αναφέρατε πάρα πολλά από τα προβλήματα τα οποία έχουν βάσει ένα πελατειακό σύστημα. Έχω στο νου μου ένα άλλο είδος σχιζοφρένεια που ήθελα να ρωτήσω την γνώμη σας πώς θα την εξηγούσατε. Δεν το βλέπω να έχει άμεση σχέση με το πελατειακό σύστημα, εκτός αν έχει. Και είναι αυτό το θέμα ταμπού που έχει να κάνει με την ακατονόμαση χώρας στα βόρεια μας σύνορα. Υποδεχτήκαμε, όπως είπατε, την διαπλάτηση της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης με τις ανατολικές χώρες, επιπυλίζοντας συνεχώς μια καραμέλα ότι αυτό δίνει μια ευκαιρία στην Ελλάδα να παίξει ένα πάρα πολύ σημαντικό ρόλο στην Ανατολική Ευρώπη και ιδιαίτερα στα Βαλκάνια, η Θεσσαλονίκη πρωτεύουσα των Βαλκανίων και το καθεξής. Μια καραμέλα που σταματήσαμε ευτυχώς να επιπυλίζουμε εδώ και καιρό για να σταματήσουν οι αυταπάτες. Το κράτος δεν έκανε τίποτα γύρω από αυτό, αλλά αυτό που είναι πάρα πολύ παράδοξο είναι ότι και ο κόσμος, ο ελληνικός λαός και προπαντός παραδόξως στη Βόρεια Ελλάδα ήταν ενάντια σε αυτόν τον ρόλο της Θεσσαλονίκης και έπαιξε ένα πρωταρχικό ρόλο να χαλάσουμε τη σχέση με τους κατανόμους του κυρίους βόρειους γείτονες, αλλά κατ' επέκταση και με πάρα πολλούς άλλους, χωρίς να μπορώ να δω πού βρίσκεται το πελατειακό συμφέρον σε αυτή την υπόθεση. Είναι μια σχιζοφρένεια που θυμίζει λιγάκι τη διαμάχη Καποδίστρια-Μαυρομιχαλαίων, κατά τη γνώμη μου. Μπορώ να δω μία μονάχα ενδεχόμενη επιρροή.
Από εκείνη ήταν πιο εξηγήσιμη, συγγνώμη που σας λέω.
Σωστά.
Γιατί οι Μαυρομιχαλαίοι ως συνδικαλιστές της εποχής δεν ήθελαν να χάσουν τα κεκτημένα δικαιώματα και ο Καποδίστριας προσπαθούσε να μεταλλήσει.
Μπορώ να σκεφτώ την αρχή μιας εξήγησης, αλλά θα ήθελα τη γνώμη σας, η οποία είναι ότι οι επιδοτήσεις από την Ευρώπη, για να έρθουμε σε μια άλλη διάσταση, ότι οι επιδοτήσεις από την Ευρώπη κατέστρεψαν την ελληνική οικονομία. Βάζοντάς μας σε μια κατάσταση ασφάλειας, οικονομικής ασφάλειας και ευημερίας, όπου έλεγε τι βλέπουμε τώρα εμείς με τους Βόρειους, προκειμένου να μην λέγονται Μακεδονία, εμείς λεφτά έχουμε από την Ευρώπη έτσι κι αλλιώς. Και αυτούς στην ανάγκη δεν θα τους αφήσουμε να πάρουν και αυτοί λεφτά από την Ευρώπη. Έχετε καμιά άλλη καλύτερη εξήγηση?
Εντάξει, το θέμα των επιδοτήσεων είναι όντως ένα ζήτημα. Εκείνο που μπορώ να πω είναι ότι επειδή την έχουμε ζήσει στην Ελλάδα και διαφορετικά, με όλα τα προβλήματα που είχε η προευρωπαϊκή Ελλάδα, ότι για να μην τα λέμε και όλα στραβά, διότι δεν είναι όλα στραβά, με όλα τα πολιτικά και κοινωνικά προβλήματα που είχε η Ευρωπαϊκή Ελλάδα, η προευρωπαϊκή Ελλάδα είχε έναν πολιτισμό της φτώχειας. Ήταν μια φτωχή χώρα, ήταν πολιτισμένη χώρα. Υπήρχε ένας κοινωνικός πολιτισμός, τον οποίο τον καταπατούσαμε, υπήρχαν παρεκβάσεις, αλλά αυτό είχαμε στιγμή αναφοράς. Δεν αποκτήσαμε ποτέ πολιτισμό του πλούτου. Δεν μπορέσαμε να το αποκτήσουμε. Και αυτό πιστεύω εκεί πέρα ευθύνονται όχι μόνο θα έρθω στο θέμα της Μακεδονίας, απλώς κάνω για αυτό που είπατε για τις επιδοτήσεις, αν κατέστρεψαν την οικονομία. Εγώ πιστεύω ότι κατέστρεψαν κάτι πολύ πιο ουσιαστικό. Το κοινωνικό κύτταρο κατέστρεψαν. Γιατί κατέστρεψαν το κοινωνικό κύτταρο. Αυτό που λέω, το πολιτισμικό κύτταρο της κοινωνίας. Διότι βέβαια όταν είδε, και αυτό πάλι δεν είναι μόνο ελληνικό φαινόμενο, αλλά όταν έχουμε ζήσει πάρα πολύ, όλοι μας την έχουμε ζήσει αυτήν την Ελλάδα, ότι πήγαινε στο νησί, ο άνθρωπος δεν είχε να σου προσφέρει παρά μόνο 2 ντομάτες και μια ρακή, αλλά αισθανόταν άρχοντας. Όταν αυτός είδε το καγέν να ξεπροβάλλει στην παραλία, τρελάθηκε. Αυτό είναι φυσιολογικό. Ήθελε και αυτός καγέν. Τι να κάνουμε. Δεν είναι. Λοιπόν, τα σχηματικά, έτσι, γελιογραφικά. Αυτό ζήσαμε. Με αποτέλεσμα να φτάσουμε 3 χρόνια, 4 χρόνια πριν την κρίση, στην μετά περίοδο των Ολυμπιακών Αγώνων, άλλο μεγάλο κατόρθωμα και αυτό του νεοελληνισμού, να έχουμε φτιάξει μια κοινωνία που έμοιαζε πάρα πολύ με νυχτομάγαζο. Όπου οι κοινωνικές αξίες που κυκλοφορούσαν ανάμεσά μας ήταν οι κοινωνικές αξίες του νυχτερινού κέντρου. Ποιος έχει το μεγαλύτερο αυτοκίνητο, ποιος ξοδεύει τα περισσότερα λεφτά και ποιος καπνίζει το μακρύτερο πουρο. Αυτές ήταν οι κοινωνικές αξίες που είχαμε εγκαταστήσει, ασχέτως οικονομικών δραστηριοτήτων. Λοιπόν, μια κοινωνία ανοιχτομάγαζο δεν μπορεί να ζήσει. Τώρα, αυτή η κοινωνία ανοιχτομάγαζο είχε διάφορες ιστορικές φαντασιώσεις, τις οποίες είχε κληρονομήσει από το παρελθόν και οι οποίες της έδιναν την ψευδαίσθηση ότι κάνει και κάτι καλύτερο από το να τα σπάει κάθε πρωί στα μπουζούκια. μέσα εκεί, χωρίς να μπορώ να, δεν είμαι ιστορικός ούτε κοινωνιολόγος, έτσι, μέσα εκεί εντάσσω και την ψυχοπαθολογία, την ψυχοπαθολογική αντίδραση απέναντι στη Μακεδονία ή σε όλα αυτά τα ζητήματα. Δεν είναι το μόνο, το ξέρουμε πάρα πολύ καλά. Κάθε τόσο ξεπηδάνε διάφορα τέτοια θέματα μέσα μας, όπου ντυνόμαστε το μανδύα του ιστορικού πρωταγωνιστή, έχοντας γνώση όμως, γιατί δεν είμαστε ηλίθιοι, έχοντας γνώση όμως ότι είμαστε κομπάρσοι. Αλλά μας δίνεται η ευκαιρία να φωνάξουμε ως πρωταγωνιστές έστω και σε μια σκηνή του έργου, του οποίου ποτέ δεν γνωρίζουμε το τέλος, όπως οι κομπάρσοι συνήθως στο θέατρο.
Το φιλόδοξο πνεύμα που μας διακατέχει σε σχέση με τα Βαλκάνια και τον ηγετικό μας ρόλο εξακολουθεί να υπάρχει. Να σας θυμίσω την Ατζέντα 2014. Απλώς ένα επίσης σημαντικό ζήτημα που τίθεται μέσα από αυτή την κρίση είναι πώς μπορείς να κάνεις εξωτερική πολιτική αυτή τη στιγμή. Έτσι, γιατί είναι ένα θέμα.
Δεν μπορείς να κάνεις εσωτερική πολιτική.
Και η Ατζέντα 2014, θα ξέρετε ασφαλώς, είναι η ένταξη των χωρών των Νότιων Βαλκανίων στην Ευρώπη. Σε μια Ευρώπη που έχει ήδη 27 χώρες μέλη. Τέλος πάντων, να μην μονοπολώ λοιπόν. Κάποιος θέλει να μιλήσει αυτή τη στιγμή, να τοποθετηθεί, παρακαλώ.
Καλησπέρα σας. Σέρμπος Σωτήρης από το Δημοκρίτιο Πανεπιστήμιο Θράκης. Σε μια παρατήρησή σας όσον αφορά το ρόλο της ελληνικής κοινωνίας, και εδώ θα ήθελα να κάνω μια διάκριση όσον αφορά το δίπολο Ελλάδα και Ευρώπη, στο εάν και κατά πόσο θεωρείτε ότι μεταξύ άλλων η ελληνική κοινωνία αντιμετωπίζει και ένα συνειδησιακό πρόβλημα όσον αφορά την αντιμετώπιση του προβλήματος. Σε συνδυασμό πάντα με το γεγονός ότι υπήρχε και μια άρχουσα τάξη στη χώρα, η οποία δεν την βοήθησε να κατευθύνει και να σμπρώξει τη χώρα προς την κατεύθυνση που θα έπρεπε, μεταξύ άλλων οδηγώντας και σε ένα συγκεκριμένο πολιτικό σύστημα. Αυτό είναι το πρώτο σχόλιο. Το δεύτερο, σε ποιο βαθμό έχουν αισθανθεί και οι Έλληνες πολίτες ότι, με διαφορετικά φυσικά βαθμό ευθύνης, ότι είναι συμμέτοχοι σε όλο αυτό. Διότι σε αντιδιαστολή με άλλες χώρες, ειδικά του Ευρωπαϊκού Νότου, όπου το χρέος έχει ιδιωτικά χαρακτηριστικά, στην Ελλάδα είναι δημόσιο, με ό,τι αυτό συνεπάγεται. Ως εκ τούτου, σε μια κοινοβουλευτική δημοκρατία, έστω και με τις αναπηρίες σε επίπεδο δημοκρατίας και αντιπροσωπευτικότητας που χαρακτηρίζουν την Ελλάδα, νομίζω ότι θα πρέπει να τονιστεί ότι υπάρχει μια πολύ μεγάλη ευθύνη των πολιτών. Για παράδειγμα, θα καταλάβαινα καλύτερα γιατί ο μέσος Ιταλός, ο μέσος Ισπανός, ακόμα και ο μέσος Βρετανός αργότερα να κληθεί να καταβάλει ένα υψηλό τίμημα για τη διάσωση των ευρωπαϊκών τραπεζών. Στην περίπτωση όμως της Ελλάδας, και ειδικά επειδή το ελληνικό τραπεζικό σύστημα, που λειτουργούν όπως και όλα τα υπόλοιπα, αλλά και στην κρίση του 2008, ήταν πολύ ασφαλές, δεν είχε εκτεθεί. Και σε όλες τις οικονομίες τις καπιταλιστικές, με έμφαση στην οικονομία της αγοράς, οι δυνάμεις της μεταρρύθμισης προέρχονται συνήθως μεταξύ άλλων και από αυτούς τους δρόντες. Στην Ελλάδα επιλέχθηκε, και δυστυχώς και η ίδια η Ευρώπη κατανόησε ότι με το υφιστάμενο πολιτικό σύστημα δεν μπορούν να προχωρήσουν τέτοιου είδους αλλαγές, ένα μοντέλο κρατικού καπιταλισμού, δηλαδή το κράτος να έρθει προς αυτή την κατεύθυνση. Οπότε θα ήθελα και το σχόλιο σας πάνω σε αυτό, διότι δεν ξέρω σε ποιο βαθμό το έχουμε συνειδητοποιήσει ότι είμαστε συμμέτοχοι σε αυτήν την προσπάθεια. Για το σχόλιο που έγινε για θέματα εξωτερικής πολιτικής, επειδή είναι και μία από τις ειδικότητες μου, απλώς να αναφερθώ σε αυτό που έχει γράψει στο παρελθόν πολύ εύστοχα ο καθηγητής Διαμαντούρης όσον αφορά την κουλτούρα του αδυνάμου που διακρίνει την Ελλάδα και τι καταστροφικές συνέπειες μεταξύ άλλων έχει σε επίπεδο, αν θέλετε, ενός αμετροϊπούς λαϊκισμού. Διότι και στην περίπτωση των Βαλκανίων για μια μεγάλη χρονική περίοδο η χώρα μας αποτέλεσε μέρος του προβλήματος παρά μέρος της λύσης. Ευχαριστώ.
Ναι. Ως προς την οικονομική πλευρά της ερώτησης, την αντιλαμβάνομαι, αλλά δυσκολεύομαι να απαντήσω. Βεβαίως, ο όρος κρατικός καπιταλισμός, αν όχι υπαρκτός σοσιαλισμός, ταιριάζει απολύτως σε αυτή την εικόνα του Λεβιάθαν που έχω εμπειρικά τελείως, γιατί δεν έχω ψηφιακή αντίληψη. Τώρα, ως προς τη συνείδηση, υπάρχει ένα μεγάλο πρόβλημα, το οποίο πιστεύω ότι υπάρχει ένα συγγενές ρήγμα στη συνείδηση της ελληνικής κοινωνίας, το οποίο το παρακολουθούμε σε όλη τη διάρκεια της σύγχρονης ελληνικής ιστορίας. Έτσι. Από τότε δηλαδή που δημιουργήθηκε αυτό το μόρφωμα στη Νότιο Βαλκανική που λεγόταν ελληνικό κράτος και που συνεχίζει να λέγεται έτσι, υπήρχε μια εσωτερική διχοτομία, την οποία χοντρικά εγώ την τοποθετώ από τη μια Ελλάδα αγροτική στραμμένη προς τη Βαλκανική ενδοχώρα και από την άλλη μια Ελλάδα με το βλέμμα στραμμένο προς τη Δύση. Έτσι, πάρα πολύ. Μπορεί κανείς να πει, ακόμα και αν βέβαια οι ιστορικοί μπορεί να με διαψεύσουν και να με βάλουν στη θέση μου, ότι ακόμα και ο εμφύλιος πόλεμος του 1946 έχει τέτοια χαρακτηριστικά. Δηλαδή είναι αυτές οι δύο Ελλάδες που εν τέλει συγκρούονται με όλα τα υπόλοιπα, τα συμπαραμαρτούντα του πολιτικού επικοδομήματος. Επειδή ποτέ δεν ψυχαναλυθήκαμε, δηλαδή ποτέ δεν καθίσαμε, γι' αυτό είπα από την αρχή κιόλας για το δημόσιο διάλογο, δηλαδή να αντιμετωπίσουμε αυτό το εσωτερικό ρήγμα, αλλά να το αντιμετωπίσουμε, δηλαδή να το αναγάγουμε σε ένα επίπεδο συμβολικό, εκεί όπου ο λόγος, ο έναρκτος λόγος έχει κάτι να πει, έτσι, και να μπορέσουμε να το επεξεργαστούμε ως κοινωνία. Αυτό είναι θέμα, δεν είναι μόνο θέμα της πολιτικής τάξης, είναι θέμα των ελίτ και της πνευματικής ελίτ. Έχει παίξει ένα καταστροφικό ρόλο εκεί. Λαμβάνοντας υπόψη ένα ελαφρυντικό, το γεγονός ότι μετά το 1974 στην Ελλάδα η έννοια της ελίτ βγήκε στην παρανομία. Η κοινωνική δημοκρατία δεν επέτρεπε την συγκρότηση οποιασδήποτε πνευματικής, πολιτικής. Τα αποτελέσματα τα ζούμε σήμερα. Η ποιότητα της πολιτικής μας τάξης οφείλεται και σε αυτό. Λοιπόν, πιστεύω ότι πλέον αυτό το ρήγμα το εσωτερικό, το συνειδησιακό, έχει κακοφορμήσει. Έχει κακοφορμήσει διότι δεν βρίσκει αντίκρισμα στην πραγματικότητα. Έτσι, γιατί η πραγματικότητα του κόσμου στον οποίο ζει είναι τελείως διαφορετική από αυτή που το δημιούργησε. Παρόλα αυτά είναι μια αγκυλωμένη ψυχική κατάσταση η οποία υπάρχει εκεί πέρα και μας ταλανίζει και πιστεύω ότι ευθύνεται για ένα μεγάλο μέρος των συναισθηματικών αντιδράσεων που έχουμε τώρα απέναντι στην κρίση. Διότι μέχρι στιγμής οι αντιδράσεις που είχαμε απέναντι στην κρίση ήταν συναισθηματικές. Ήταν η αντίδραση ενός θυμωμένου, πληγωμένου, αγανακτισμένου ανθρώπου, ο οποίος δεν πονάει τόσο πολύ που δεν μπορεί να σκεφτεί. Εντάξει, πονάει. Ο λόγος για τον οποίο δεν μπορεί να σκεφτεί δεν είναι τόσο ο πόνος. Υπήρξαν φορές που πόνεσε και περισσότερο. Δεν τρελαθούμε. Λοιπόν, και όλο αυτό ανάγεται σε ένα συναισθηματικό επίπεδο, το οποίο ψάχνει να βρει τρόπους έκφρασης πολιτικής ή άλλης και δεν τους βρίσκει. Και γι' αυτό παράγει κοινωνικούς σπασμούς. Δηλαδή, με συγχωρείτε, η κατάχρηση, έχετε σκεφτεί ποτέ, μιας που μιλάμε που αναφερθήκαμε στον όρο συνείδηση, τώρα θα τελειώσω, η κατάχρηση της ελληνικής σημαίας τους τελευταίους μήνες, ότι ο καθένας ζώνεται μια ελληνική σημαία και βγαίνει στους δρόμους ως μπουμπουλίνα, ενώ στην πραγματικότητα είναι ιδιοκτήτης άδειας ταξί, δεν είναι εντυπωσιακή? Το έχετε δει πουθενά αλλού αυτό το πράγμα? Ναι, στην Ελλάδα του Euro 2004. Το έχουμε ξαναδεί.
Και με αυτή την παρατήρηση φτάνουμε στο τέλος τουλάχιστον αυτής της πλευράς. Θα δώσω το λόγο στους επόμενους ομιλητές και σας ευχαριστώ όλους. Ευχαριστώ ιδιαίτερα.
Εγώ ευχαριστώ και για την πρόσκληση που δεν το είπα στην αρχή και για την συνομιλία που είχαμε και για τη συνομιλία που είχαμε.
Απλώς ο χρόνος πιέζει, όπως καταλαβαίνετε, και είναι πολύ δύσκολο να συνεχίσουμε αυτό το διάλογο. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you, Marina. I'm sure to listen to your next radio program. That was quite stunning. And in person, it's even more impressive. And thank you, Takis, for your remarks on Europe and Greece and Europe, education and the public sector, and I certainly you established a perfect foundation upon which we're able to build. We're ready to move ahead to the next session, and so I would like to introduce the European Ombudsman, Nikiforos Diamandouros, who also is a tenured professor of political science at the University of Athens. And I had this very much in mind when I invited Professor Diamandouros, because we have our students read books that he edited on political development in Greece and also in Southern Europe. It's extremely interesting analysis. So I'm hoping that he's able to wear two hats today, the hat of the Ombudsman, a person who's representing one of the key institutions of the European Union, and also a person who's more than capable of a keen analysis. To moderate the session, I have invited Nikos Konstantaros, the managing editor of Kathimerini, who's written a moving series of articles in English, in the English pages of Kathimerini, on what's happening in Greece. And if you haven't read them, you can start with the article that's on the website of the English version of Kathimerini, and then go backwards insofar as you're able to find them. I'm pleased that you have both accepted the invitation. We'll have a similar kind of setup here. We'll ask the Ombudsman to speak from the podium formally, and then we'll move to the armchairs. I apologize that the seats are a little bit low. I think the immediacy does offer something that you don't get if we're sitting behind the table. So, with no further ado, Professor Diamandouros, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. There we go. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the introduction, and for the comments, and particularly for giving me a chance to make a couple of preliminary remarks. I stand before you at this point as a retired tenured professor at the University of Athens, to put things straight. I also stand before you, however, primarily as European Ombudsman, and I need to clarify that the terms of my appointment make it very difficult for me to comment on political issues. Therefore, my major address to you will be on matters European, if you please, not on the political scene in Greece, however exciting and heart-rending it might be for us right now. So I want to apologize to you for that, but it is in fact a constraint that is something that I cannot in any way contravene in my formal address. I will clearly be available for comments, but I want you to appreciate the constraints which I'm operating under. Let me just then say that I'm particularly delighted to be back in Thessaloniki, and I want to thank especially the Michael and Kitty Dukakis Center for Public and Humanitarian Service, and in particular its Executive Director, Professor David Wisner, for kindly inviting me to participate in this important event, which coincides, and you've mentioned it already, David, but I'd like to go over it, coincides with three major milestones in the history of a distinguished educational institution having deep historical roots, both in Greece and in the broader historical space of Southeastern Europe. And these are the 125th anniversary of the founding of Anatolia College, the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the American College of Thessaloniki, and thirdly, the formal inauguration of the Michael and Kitty Dukakis Center for Public and Humanitarian Service. I'm indeed pleased to note and to acknowledge that back in October 2000, I also participated in the Dukakis chair by having given a lecture at the time here, again at the invitation of Dr. Wisner, who obviously has not learned from history and has committed the second error of inviting me again. In my address today, I would like to share some reflections with you about ongoing efforts in the European Union, but also in the member states of the European Union, the United States, and also international organizations to promote better regulation and to advance reform. better regulation might sound as a particularly boring topic, to very many of you, but it does address major aspects of reform everywhere, including Greece, and I hope that you can see it from that perspective. The economic and financial crises of the last 2 years on both sides of the Atlantic contain important lessons for regulatory policy. Most importantly, they have emphatically confirmed that markets do not exist in a vacuum or in isolation. They exist to serve a purpose, which is to deliver sustainable prosperity for all. And they do not always succeed in doing this on their own. Regulation, therefore, has a positive and necessary role to play. The crises have highlighted the need to address the problems generated by incomplete, ineffective, underperforming and failed regulatory measures and policies, and in many cases to do so urgently. It has become increasingly clear that the way in which we regulate has a considerable impact on whether the objectives set by legislation will be met efficiently. Over the past 10 years, the European Union has developed a better regulation policy with a view to simplifying and improving existing regulation, to designing new and better regulation, and to reinforcing respect for and the effectiveness of rules, including laws. In Greece, on the other hand, the situation is regrettably very far from being satisfactory. The distinguishing features of the Greek regulatory framework are, first, a large number of very detailed specialized laws seeking to regulate every conceivable aspect of their subject matter. Second, various provisions that are scattered throughout existing legislation and regulate the same subject matter, often resulting in serious overlaps. And thirdly, outdated legislation which remains in force even though it's been overtaken by events. In my view, this triple problem of over-legislation, poor or bad legislation, and absence of legislation in the Greek legal order nurtures illegality, which takes the form variably of both illicit and illegal practices. My aim today is to put before you some reflections designed to assist Greek policymakers in their efforts to map out the road to reform, and to identify the way out of the current problems and of the political and legal impasses facing Greek society as a whole, but individual citizens as well. I will do so by focusing on better regulation practices in the European Union and selected member states and international organizations, allowing comparisons with Greece to be drawn more by inference than through outright comment. Allow me again to say that I consider the topic of better regulation to be an important but neglected topic, which significantly ties in with the theme of this conference. Let me also pose a question here, which may very well have come up in your mind, in the minds of some of you in the audience. Given the profound political, social, economic, and I might add, moral crisis which Greece is currently facing, is this the right time for yet another proposal for reform? I would attempt to answer this by arguing that the root cause of the crisis facing Greece is inextricably linked to the structure of the Greek state and to a, with regrettably few exceptions, generally inefficient and quite often corrupt public administration at both the central and the local government levels. And I want again to note with personal enthusiasm the quality of the content of Mayor Boudaris' address to you in terms precisely of this kind of moving forward and of trying to come up with public policy that can in fact overcome this kind of problem. Regrettably again, the recruitment to the Greek public administration, historically, but especially over the past 3 decades, has been effected by means of non-meritocratic criteria that have in turn produced and sustained an administrative culture pervaded, again with rare, brave and lonely exceptions, by nepotism, clientelism, low skills and low morale. Hence, in my view, the need for comprehensive reform that creatively adapts best practices derived from elsewhere to Greek needs. Let me now turn to better regulation in the European Union and elsewhere. The first program to simplify and generally improve the regulatory environment in the European Union, known as Better Regulation, was inaugurated by the European Commission in the year 2002. This was an ambitious long-term program aiming to simplify and improve existing legislation, promote better drafting of new legislation, and reinforce regulatory compliance and effectiveness, while always adhering to the principle of proportionality. The ultimate objective of this program has been to cultivate a regulatory environment which protects citizens and gives European companies the scope to operate more competitively, more effectively, and more innovatively within a particularly competitive global environment. The program was devised with the aim of reducing red tape, improving the quality of legislation, and drafting laws which better correspond to the needs of consumers and businesses. The Better Regulation program combines a range of different measures and initiatives, the most important of which I shall discuss presently, at various points along a conceptual spectrum marked on the one end, by the prospective, that is, ex-ante evaluation of new initiatives and proposals that are still under negotiation, and at the other end, by the retrospective, ex-post evaluation of legislative acts that have already been adopted. Implementation of the Better Regulation program has brought about significant changes in the way in which the Commission maps out policies and develops legislative proposals. However, the initiative does not end there. At the end of 2009, the European Commission announced its intention to go a step beyond better regulation and to focus its efforts on what it called smart regulation, the term used in the new action plan announced last October. I would point out that the difference between these two initiatives lies in the fact that the Better Regulation initiative gave priority to the quality of new legislative proposals, while the Smart Regulation initiative aims at simplifying, evaluating, and in particular strengthening the role of stakeholders in the process of legislation. Let me now focus on the key characteristics of these two Commission initiatives. To begin with, the action plan covers the entire process of policy making and legislation, from the drafting of a new law to its application, enforcement, evaluation, and review. It is important in this context that there should be a proper assessment of the need to adopt a new legislative initiative and of the consequences of such an initiative. However, it is equally necessary to apply the existing legislation correctly and, where needed, to review it on the basis of the experience gained. Secondly, a key feature of this process is an improvement in the status of citizens and civil society. Specifically, better regulation ensures clarity as regards the applicable law and hence allows citizens to regulate their behavior accordingly. Furthermore, it guarantees transparency in the legislative process and hence makes control and participation feasible. The basic aim of the Commission's action plans is to ensure that the opinions of those who are most affected by the legislation, that is the citizens, are taken into account during the legislative process. For a number of years, the Commission has been systematically organizing public consultations. In the light of the Lisbon Treaty and within the framework of smart regulation, the Commission is committed to strengthening the participation of citizens and of civil society by extending the consultation period and by improving the procedure. Let me now look more closely at the specific measures which are being taken at the EU level to achieve the objectives I've just outlined. These measures can be subsumed into two categories. First, those that aim to simplify existing legislation, and second, those that aim to improve the legislative process and hence the quality of new legislation. As time passes, legislation becomes partly outdated or irrelevant. Existing legislation should be examined on a regular basis, so that those of its parts that fall under these categories can be repealed. To make this kind of re-examination practicable, the Commission has recourse to what it calls sunset or review clauses. Codification is the process of gathering in a single text all the amendments to legislative acts which have been approved over time. Codification helps reduce the volume of EU legislation and at the same time renders texts more readable and allows for enhanced legal clarity, thus contributing to transparency and to ease of enforcement. Upon examination of the laws and their amendments, cases of divergence and inconsistencies within a law or between laws may come to light. Therefore, in addition to gathering all the amendments into a unified text, it is sometimes necessary to revise the law. This process is, in your jargon, called recasting. A typical example of recasting can be seen in the legislation and application of the principle of equal opportunities and equal treatment for men and women in matters of employment and occupation. Directive 2006-54 EC clarified and simplified community legislation on equal treatment of men and women in matters of employment and occupation, updating the relevant legislative texts and gathering into a unified document the relevant sections of the 7 directives relating to this matter. The single text provides a coherent legal basis arising from the unified directives, which are assigned to separate chapters. The Commission undertakes to check whether the existing legislation is fit for purpose. In this process, the following factors are taken into account: the level of enforcement of the relevant legislation in the Member States, complaints and proceedings instituted in respect of infringements, consistency with other relevant regulatory acts. In 2010, evaluations began in the following 4 large policy sectors: environment, employment, social policy, and industrial policy. The Commission's aim is to carry out thorough checks in all sectors of EU activity in the years to come. Article 11 of the Treaty of the European Union requires the EU institutions, first, to give citizens and representative associations the opportunity to make known and publicly exchange their views in all areas of Union action, and second, to maintain an open, transparent, and regular dialogue with representative associations and civil society. Furthermore, the European Commission has a special duty to carry out consultations with interested parties in order to ensure that the Union's actions are consistent and transparent. The Commission attaches great importance to the question of consultation within the scope of its policy on better regulation. EU law affects all citizens without exception in all the Member States. I should add that EU law forms an integral part of the domestic legal order. It is not external law. It does not belong to the others. How citizens therefore perceive EU law as a means of strengthening their position, as a restriction, or a source of possible benefits or burdens, and whether they believe that they have a say in approving that law, are questions of the greatest importance for the Union's legitimacy and for its efficacy. Through ongoing contact and dialogue with stakeholders, be they individuals, companies, NGOs, and other civil society organizations, regional or local public authorities in the Member States, as well as academics, experts, and interested parties from their countries, the Commission is able to stay abreast of developments, requirements, and issues arising in Europe, so that it can judge whether it is advisable to adopt European legislation in a particular sector. This dialogue takes various forms, such as green papers, white papers, announcements for workshops, standing consultative groups, and online consultations. Examples of announcements are the European Energy and Transport Forum or the European Health Forum. There are also structured procedures, such as social dialogue with trade unions and employers' organizations, and dialogue between the Commission and European and national associations of regional and local authorities. One of the most common forms of dialogue is the online public consultation, where each interested party can submit comments on a particular draft proposal being considered by the Commission. More specifically, the Commission draws up a document in which it first explains why it wishes to consider a particular issue, second, specifies the points on which it wishes to receive contributions from interested parties, and third, sets a time limit for submitting contributions which are published on the relevant website. The Commission draws up a report containing the results of the consultation and uses the conclusions drawn from this process in the impact evaluation report. One important aim of the smart regulation initiative is to provide longer time scales for consultations, an increase from 8 weeks to 12, and to simplify procedure. I should add that the European Ombudsman contributes to public consultations carried out by the Commission on issues relating to his duties. The Ombudsman's most recent contribution concerned the review of the European Union financial regulation. Additionally, the European Ombudsman has recourse to the mechanism of public consultation, both during the examination of petitions, delays in the Commission's payments, policy on inclusion of people with special needs, and when drafting statements of public service principles and of requiring appropriate ethical behavior by civil servants. An improvement in legislation undoubtedly calls for a full assessment of the impact of any legal proposal, that is, of their economic, social, and environmental consequences. It also calls for an examination of various alternative solutions and for the selection of those solutions that are capable of delivering the best results with the fewest negative side effects. This is an approach which is knowledge-based and aims to ensure that decisions on the implementation of an initiative are based on solid data and thorough analysis of the available options. Impact assessments enable the Commission to determine whether or not it is advisable to improve the legislation at the EU level. At the same time, they serve as an aid to determining the most suitable legislative or non-legislative measure. This allows the Commission to take decisions based on a range of options, each of which has its corresponding benefits and costs. Assessments are carried out on all legislative proposals and on all other important initiatives for the adoption of public policy. Major proposals, however, are subject to a more detailed impact assessment. To strengthen the role of impact assessment, the European Commission has launched an independent external audit body, the Impact Assessment Board, which is responsible for quality control of all the impact assessments prepared by the Commission's various departments that have competence in a particular area. The Commission has also issued instructions and guidelines on the preparation of impact assessments for use by its services when engaging in this task. When drafting explanatory memoranda for its legislative proposals, the Commission focuses on 5 elements which reflect a set model: the consultations which have been held and their results, the impact assessment which it has carried out, the grounds for selecting the measure which it is proposing, especially in respect of the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality, and lastly, the financial impact of the proposal. Let me now turn to practices from the Member States. The United Kingdom has long experience in seeking to improve legislation and legislative procedure, both through the adoption of strategic plans, through programs designed to improve legislation, and through the establishment of competent agencies. Specifically, a special service, the Better Regulation Executive, or BRE, which forms part of the Department for Business Innovation and Skills, is responsible for issues concerning the improvement of legislation at the interdepartmental level. Its aim is to improve the drafting of new laws and communications policy and to simplify and update existing legislation. The service operates on the basis of the following 5 key principles of better regulation, which state that any regulation should be transparent, accountable, proportionate, consistent, targeted. A significant innovation in British practice is the fact that businesses can, on their own initiative, contact the Better Regulation Executive, point out problems, and propose ways of improving specific legislative acts. Proposals must include a title, a description of the problem faced by the business concerned, an explanation as to whether the problem is due to contradictory legislation, suggestions for addressing the problem, ways in which the business is expected to benefit if its proposal is adopted, the sector affected by the problem, and the public authority which, in the view of the business concerned, is responsible for the issue. The service is required to respond to every proposal it receives within 90 days. After a preliminary check, proposals which are accepted for further examination are published on the website. For those which are rejected, the interested parties receive a reasoned and detailed reply. There is also the Regulatory Policy Committee, a government advisory body responsible for assessing the cost and benefits of legislative activity. Its mission is to ensure that when the government decides to adopt new laws, account has to be taken of all the risks, all the various alternatives, the cost, the benefits, and the wider impact of the proposed legislation at the economic, social, and environmental levels. In Sweden, to go to another member state, the utmost importance attached to the way in which laws are drafted. Clear wording or plain language is a priority. Since 1965, mechanisms have been in place for checking the wording of laws. Since 1976, this has been the responsibility of a special division of the Ministry of Justice, which, apart from checking proposed laws, holds seminars for all those engaged in the legislative process, publishes manuals and instructions, and gives advice. In practice, all draft laws are checked to ensure that they are clear, comprehensible, and reader-friendly. All those subject to the law should be able to understand, says the directive, without difficulty, what behavior is expected of them. A major goal of this initiative is to influence administrative language. If the laws are written in a clear language, says the initiative, the administrative documents enforcing them will all follow suit. Specific rules have been adopted and must be respected by those responsible for drafting laws. To give you but a few illustrative examples which might sound amusing to you, but are in fact the policy of the state of Sweden. An article of a law cannot be more than 3 paragraphs long. Each paragraph should convey a separate idea. The components of a sentence, subject, the verb, and the object, should be as close together as possible, and use of the passive voice should be avoided. The manual concerning plain language in the Swedish government is a 100-page long document, which is being adhered to with very great consistency. Let me now look to the practices adopted and promoted by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Since 1995, the OECD has been focusing on ways to improve legislation in the member states. In 1997, it adopted recommendations on improving the quality of lawmaking, and in 2005, it revised those recommendations. These recommendations and principles are mainly oriented towards the economic sphere, although some of them can be applied in all sectors. By way of an example, here are some of the general applicable principles. Adopt at the political level broad programs of regulatory reform that establish clear objectives and frameworks for implementation. Assess impacts and review regulations systematically to ensure that they meet their intended objectives in a changing and complex economic and social environment. And third, ensure that regulations and regulatory processes are transparent and non-discriminatory. In 2009, a special committee, the Regulatory Policy Committee, or RPC, was set up to assist OECD members in their efforts to improve legislation by sending experts into the countries to be able to assist them. Additionally, within the OECD framework, studies are drawn up on each country's progress and meetings are held, the minutes of which are available on the OECD website. Because time constraints are such, I will simply mention that similar practices have long also been operative in the United States, but particularly through the Freedom of Information Act that has been in force now for 45 years. There have been a series of measures adopted that have had a major impact on reform and better regulation, also by ensuring that the practices I've just described are also being adhered to in a very, very strict way. Let me conclude now by briefly coming back to Greece and focusing on Greece. European experience, and that of the other countries and international organizations that I have mentioned, provide, I believe, Greek policymakers with examples and practices on which they can build a strategy for escaping from the present situation and from finding the road to reform. However, a basic condition for achieving this aim is, in the final analysis, the existence, or failing this, the creation and nurturing of a public administration capable of understanding and of effectively implementing the aims embodied in a strategy leading to the road reform. An undertaking of such magnitude necessarily requires long time frames and a great deal of advanced planning. In this context, at any rate, it would seem to me that 4 initial initiatives can help towards that end. First, substantial restructuring of recruitment structures of the public administration, making it possible to adopt flexible mechanisms for selecting personnel and efficient and systematic use of the cohorts so recruited. Second, strengthening of the National School of Public Administration and systematic deployment of its graduates in top important executive positions in the public administration. Third, the development and systematic implementation of a program of ongoing training, continuous training for the existing workforce in the public administration, which measures must be implemented consistently and without exceptions. And lastly, the establishment within the civil service of specialized units devoted to strategic planning and to quality control, including impact assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, time will tell whether Greek governments and Greek society in general have the political will and the moral commitment to respond to the challenges associated with the logic of such a strategy for better regulation, for reform, and in the final analysis, for remaining steadfastly committed to the country's European vocation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from my apartment. I'm very happy and honored to be with you today. I'd like to start off with 2 anniversaries. I understand Professor Diamandouros has constraints about talking about the political scene in Greece, but I would like to note two anniversaries that passed last month. One is that 2 years ago, in his first cabinet meeting, Prime Minister George Papandreou said that one of the first things that his government would do would be to simplify the laws. I was enthusiastic when I heard that, and I thought that we were entering a new era. 30 years earlier, we joined the European Union, what is now called the European Union. And there we were all very happy that our country had entered a new phase. And today, in these hours, we're sitting among the ruins of George Papandreou's government, and we're all wondering what went wrong. How did things go so awry in this period that has intervened, in the last 2 years and in the last 30 years? So, Professor, I'd like to ask a question right from the start. Do you think that the European regulations needed to be enforced with greater power and greater pain?
Thank you. Let me just clarify that I'm entirely at the audience's disposal if they wish to have this responses in Greek or in English. I was asked to address you in English, but I'm entirely at your disposal for answering in Greek as well, obviously. Mr. Konstantaras, I think to answer that question, we have to bear in mind, again, some of the remarks that Dukakis Symposium made about what do we understand of Europe. Okay? Because Europe, in the construction of the European Union, is based on a very important distinction between the European and the member state levels. In other words, this very difficult notion of subsidiarity or epicuricότητα. It is not the business of the European Union to be able to enforce its regulations in the member states. It is clearly the responsibility of the member states to be able to do that. If they fail to do it, it's part of their of the cost that they pay for not doing it. So my answer to you is the role of the European Union is to be able to provide the framework within which the member states shall take the initiative to apply and then pursue. If they fail to do it, they obviously end up in having problems which can be cumulative in the end produce crises. So in the issue of I deliberately, time didn't allow me, did not make direct references to the patent absence of mechanisms for regulatory assessment. In Greece we have set up structures, both within the parliament and also within the government, for ensuring follow-through and effective control. I'm afraid they have not performed as we might have expected.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. Is there follow-through on what we say that we will do? You just said that there isn't, and we all know that. We pass laws, we don't enforce them, and we just carry on as we were doing before the law was passed.
Allow me to say to you, yes, I agree, but then to also point on something which in fact is obsessive in my own thinking. Okay, two things. First of all, I wholeheartedly endorse Takis Theodoropoulos' lamentation of the absence of education in the form of pedagogy, not only education, παιδεία. Right? This is a very major problem. The second, more concrete problem is to be able to have the kind of regulation, application, assessment, or follow-through systematically as I've described it. You need the requisite degree of a quality public administration. And the way in which the public administration has been recruited and staffed historically has not provided us with, again, with occasional impressive exceptions. Let us not be leveling. Let us not say that everyone in the public service is incompetent. Everyone is corrupt. Let's be very clear about that is not the case. But the overwhelming, we have among us also a professor of the School of Public Administration who can in fact confirm it or disconfirm it. But my view is that the major problem is the human resources that have been brought into the public administration, upon which this kind of application, this kind of, if you please, vigilance is being expected, are not such as to be able to do it in a systematic and thorough way.
But is it only a question of the quality of the people who are recruited and the way that they are recruited? When you have a system where we seem to have very little accountability, very little evaluation, a very weak framework for the best to rise?
Clearly not. What I'm trying to avoid is gliding inevitably towards the idea everything's at fault, everyone is to blame, therefore we begin to share responsibility but diffuse it at the same time. Okay, if everyone is to blame, no one is to blame. Okay, allow me to make a political comment that is historically sufficiently back not to cause problems. Okay, I'm speaking now as a citizen but also as an academic. The prevalent view among us concerning the military dictatorship of 1967-74 was that it was imposed from without. It was imposed by the Americans, it was imposed by the CIA, it was imposed by others. So when finally the regime left, we were free then to also say the externally imposed regime is gone, we've got nothing to worry about, we can go forward without in fact engaging in what, as I always said, psychoanalytical introspection to say, were we perhaps also partly responsible as a society for what occurred? If in fact these people came from Mars, well, they left, and then we were free to go forward. I think this is a very important major issue that has to do with the fact that we need to be able to pinpoint responsibility, to assume our responsibilities, and also our moral, in fact, obligations as a society. And therefore, yes, I can understand what you're saying. Of course, it is not only the citizens that are to be given responsibility. Clearly, the political elite is. But let us also take both sides of the equation into consideration when we, in fact, assess the current problems and the current crisis.
Right. I'm just wondering why we say we need to do this, we need to do that. Why has it not been happening? Is there something in our society that leaves things for another day and doesn't take the problem today very seriously until we reach the dead end? Why do we delay so much in solving our problems?
This could take us very, very far afield as to why. Let me just make two comments. First of all, I categorically deny any kind of cultural determinism. This is the way we've been, okay? Or any kind of pseudo-biological racist idea of, well, the Greek DNA is such that. Okay, let's just get all of these things out of the way. Okay.
Could I clarify my question so that it doesn't seem that I said that?
No, I'm in no way imputing that to you.
No,
that's absolutely clear.
But I want to say it's this thing that you find in every culture, where people, you go into a factory or you go into a country and people say, we've always done it this way. Well, we don't want to change the way we've been doing it. What is it that holds us?
Let me put it this way. I said in my remarks, and I remain convinced that the root cause of the current crisis is in fact not economic or financial, it is political. It's profoundly political. And it has to do with what I would call at this point the bankruptcy of the state paradigm that we have been operating with, for a long number of years and generations. Okay. Call it the clientelist state, call it whatever. I'll give you my own view with apologies for the jargon. Okay. I am inclined to think of what I call the post-Ottoman state. Okay. Why the post-Ottoman? Let's be very clear again. I'm in no way trying to somehow introduce this idea that for everything that's wrong in Greece, it's the 400 years of Ottoman rule that are to blame. Okay, let's just please disabuse ourselves of this kind of fantasy. Okay, we've been around as an independent state for close to 200 years. We have our own responsibilities. We cannot blame others, be it the Turks, the Americans, the Russians, Skotines Dynamis, or whatever. So my position is that the way the state has been structured in what I call the post-Ottoman legacy, okay, which means there is a state that has not been built on what you would call rational Weberian structures, okay, without going into too many technical terms. Poor Weber, when he talked about different kinds of regimes, spoke about a regime which he called, kind of traditional regimes, in which, in fact, what coheres, the glue that keeps people together is, in fact, tradition. And then he said there is a subcategory which very rarely noticed of traditional rule that is, in fact, what comes up when tradition begins to erode, but its major characteristics, which are in fact a highly personalized exercise of power, is what's at the root of that, okay, becomes shorn of tradition and therefore becomes much more prone to being arbitrary and abusive. And he called these, again, let's be clear about the terms, he called them sultanic regimes. He was not thinking about the Ottomans and the Turks and everything, let's be very clear about that. He was talking about a particular conceptual category. What we're talking about here is regimes in which the exercise of power is being exercised in a very personal way, in which the distinction between the private and the public is very difficult to make, where in fact the rulers consider the public to be essentially proprietary, and the public office is proprietary. Witness the fact, going from the sublime to the ridiculous, that historically very many of our ministers take their papers with them when they go home. Okay. And one of the problems we have with the study of the 1940s and the Civil War is that very many of the archives of the period, in fact, went home with the minister who left. So this idea of public power as a private entitlement, okay, is at the root of a conception of the state that in fact does not allow us to be able to think in terms of planning, forward-looking, rationality, etc., etc. So I think that my view, and obviously I would need much more time to develop it, is that again, we need to look at the structure, nature of the paradigm of the state with which we've been operating, which is in fact closer to what I would call the Weberian category of sultanic, rather than in fact rational rule as it has been done. Is there an explanation for that? Again, Mr. Theodoropoulos said it in a number of ways. Historically, Greece belongs to that part of the European continent which did not take part in the major events that shaped European modernity, meaning the Renaissance, meaning the Enlightenment, meaning also, let me say, the wars of religion. Why the wars of religion? Why do we care about what the Protestants and the Catholics did? We are Orthodox, we don't care about it, those of us who are Orthodox. But I think we do, because out of the slaughter of 150 years of the war of religion in Central and Western Europe emerged a major idea of modernity, and that is toleration. When the Catholics and the Protestants tired with killing each other for 150 years, it finally occurred to them that there's perhaps a third way of going forward. Neither that all the Catholics would exterminate all the Protestants so they would all be happy, or all the Protestants would exterminate all the Catholics, but they would have to live with each other. They would have to live with the other side. Toleration is a very major conquest of modernity. I'm afraid toleration is not an implicit ingredient of our own culture.
Yes. No, it isn't. And as you said earlier, it seems that the personalities that drive politics very much are very much a factor of that. There isn't so much the social good that is the aim as the personal triumph of the individual who has the power. Now, I saw some grounds for optimism today, because we're privileged to be the third speakers here, and we had Mayor Boutaris earlier and Thessaloniki-ACT. And the two things that sprang out from there were the new people who had come into politics now. We were all very happy when we saw this happening in 2010. We know that Mayor Boutaris and Mayor Kaminis and many other mayors are in the very front of the clash that will determine what Greece will look like in the future. And we know that they're having a very difficult time, but they are there, and we have hope that they will stay there, and this will be the route for further development. And then listening to Mr. Theodoropoulos, it was a joy to hear a public intellectual with a large audience saying very interesting, entertaining things that haven't been heard very much in Greece. There are very good intellectuals, but they are not listened to. What we listen to is the television set with the 9 heads shouting at the same time. And that's why we are in this fog of confusion right now. So now in the crisis we see new things developing. Do you think that the crisis will force a change in public administration, in regulation, that people are now ready and demanding change?
Let me use a trite expression, which is that hope dies last. I think if we don't insist in hoping that we'll be able to turn the page, we've got no future, and I don't happen to be a pessimist in that sense. Yes, I also believe, and it is very much historically established, that very often, not always, crises produce solutions. And major crises produce, in fact, paradigm shifts. Whether we are at this point remains to be seen. Where, Mayor Boutaris' I think intervention was exciting precisely in that it focused on concrete measures that are being taken at the level of the second largest city in Greece, which in fact, is roughly, about 10% of the population of Greece. Okay. In indicating that there are specific ways of coming out of the boxes, of being able to reach out to other sides of society, be it the entrepreneurial part of society, because let's also acknowledge that part of the problem of the last 30 years or so has been, but historically also longer term in Greece, has been a very strong diffidence and reticence towards the notion of entrepreneurial activity. Okay. In a particular part of our intellectual climate, business is dirty. And the bloody problem is, of course, that it may be dirty, but you need to be able to engage in business, to be able to make some money, to be able to do other things which you enjoy. Okay. So what I like about Mayor Boutaris is that he is utilizing his own background as an entrepreneur. He's building bridges. And building bridges is, in fact, what would be the alternative paradigm. the paradigm towards a different way of governance, of understanding how the political class should approach it. So the answer is, as we stand right now in a very major crisis, Mr. Kosmandaras, all I can do is hope, and very much earnestly hope, that this will be the catalyst for, in fact, new forces coming towards the surface, for taking the initiative and offering the Greek people the opportunity to make different choices they've made in the past.
Do you see the reforms that have been proposed so far and the new laws that have been passed, for example, the new disciplinary regulations in the public sector and so on, being enough to kickstart the Greek public administration, or do you think that there is much more that needs to be done with this level?
I think that Professor Karkatsoulis is much more in a position and knowledgeable about these things than myself. Let me give you a broader view. And the broader view, again, has to do with education in the sense of pedia. You've got to inspire your audiences in order to be able to lead them. You cannot only discipline them. To be sure, in the last 30 years, again, the balance between the carrot and the stick has been lost. Okay. In the last 30 years, very significant aspects of our own public culture have emphasized rights, but not obligations. Okay. I am very much in favor, completely committed to the observance of rights. But I also recognize that my right to strike stops where your right to go home begins. And if you don't go home, then I'm violating your fundamental right to exercise your own right to go home. So the idea that I have an unfettered right to be able to bring everything to a standstill to make a point, in fact, is not what the rule of law and what democracy expects of citizens. So from that perspective, disciplinary measures for the civil service, without all the requisite prior steps of continuing education, of providing incentives, of doing away with the non-meritocratic criteria for selecting, in fact, would not be necessarily, in my own view, a particularly productive measure. That's another way of saying that because of the mess we've managed to get ourselves into historically, the way out is going to be a long haul. It cannot be a quick fix. We cannot just simply turn things around and as of tomorrow everything will go well. And we've got to internalize and understand precisely that it's going to be a long haul. And the long haul means being prepared, again, deriving from inside ourselves the inner resources to make the moral commitments for us to be able to move forward in this way.
At this point, I think we should open the debate to the floor.
Leo Michael Stonelis. I would like to ask Professor Diamandouros to comment on a personal observation, which does not come from an analysis of the Greek DNA, but from a comparative perspective. What I see is that we tend here in Greece to compress a very important phase in our public affairs, in our public life. We tend to go immediately from the pronouncement of intent, the program, to the end result. It seems that we ignore what's in between, and you spoke about that. In other words, we ignore the process of implementation, the hard work that's needed for one to get from Troy to Ithaca. And I would like to have your opinion on that.
Mr. Thanalis, I have known this gentleman for more than 30 years, so I'm delighted to see him again. You essentially answered your own question by saying that the content of my intervention was precisely that. And that's why I may have given you the impression of being somewhat apologetic about the topic that I have chosen. I'm not apologetic because I'm very much committed to it. But it is in fact the boring part, the unseen part, okay, of what it takes to be effective and to be successful, which is attention to detail, perseverance, foresight, organization. Okay. We are people, and again, I keep referring to Mr. Theodoropoulos because in his own capacity as an author and a man of letters, I might be able to enlighten us. We are much more taken, enamored, if you please, of intuition. Okay. We're enamored of all sorts of instinctive and impulsive aspects. Okay, and we arrogate to ourselves a kind of a national character that is impulsive. So be it. But of course, impulses do not always necessarily lead to good results, and it might help to have a little bit also of the boring part of routine, of working through the details, of being able to focus on things, or at least some of us can do that, and others can do the more high-flying and visionary aspects. Both are needed in society, but I think we need a balance of that one, and we don't have it.
Mr. Theodoropoulos.
It's a very interesting remark because Seferis, it reminds me of Seferis in his diary, when he says that as soon as I find the word, the rest of the poem does not interest me. And I think it's, and that's why we do not have in Greece a big tradition of novel. We do not have big novels. I mean, we have, it's a poetic culture.
Which is more of an oral rather than a written culture
yes,
as
of
well.
Course, of course.
Which also has profound implications for us.
The passage to novel has been done only this recent years. I mean, it marks our European period. We had novels in the 19th century, but they were more or less imitators of what was happening abroad. I mean, they were translators, more or less. Big writers. I mean, it's not a matter of evaluation of the work, but they always looking. But I think it was very interesting what you said. Nikifor, something else. What you said before about the tradition and, of course, the cultural determinism. I agree with you. There is a passage in Edmond Abou's travels. La Grèce contemporaine. Mid-19th century, when he goes to a village in Messenia where they produce silk, and his family was producing silk in Normandy. I don't remember where Abou comes from, and he saw the way they were producing the silk, and he explained to them that in my place, in my country, we have a way to produce silk in half of the time you need to produce your own silk. They were enthusiastic. The whole village was talking about this new way of producing silk for 2 days. In the taberna they were talking, and the third day they went on doing the same thing they were doing the day before. I mean, that's it's not a cultural determinism. I think, Nikiforos, I know I think this post-Ottoman state has to do with the Orthodox Church. It has something to do there. The Orthodox Church, because it was the pillar. I mean, the bridge between the Ottoman Empire and the new state. The Church played a major role.
I agree with you as far as Greece is concerned. Post-Ottoman would also take in, however, all the former territories of the Ottoman Empire. Therefore, lots of Arab countries. We wouldn't be able to apply that. May I have your permission to make a comment, an additional comment? Apropos of what's been said, Edmond Abou was a very important public intellectual in France in the 19th century. He wrote a book which turned out to be enormously controversial in Greece, and of course he was denounced as a Miss-Helene. Okay, a Miss-Helene because he criticized us, and then he wrote a novel, which was called Le Roi de Montagne, the King of the Mountains, which was patterned after the brigands, listes, of the 19th century. Okay. A very major thing. I remind you that in 1871 there was a very celebrated and notorious act of brigandage in which a family of brigands in Steria Elada arrested a group of nobles, and in fact a group of lords who were visiting the United Kingdom. There was a huge uproar, of course. At that point there was all sorts of very derogatory things said in the House of Lords about Greece and the rule of law, etc., etc. And the formal reaction of the Greek state was, in fact, to denounce the act by saying it was clearly done by non-Greeks, which then produced the Le Roi de Montaigne, whose central character is, remember, he's Frenchman, he's a novelist, he's angry. The central character in the Roi de Montaigne is O Patriotis Pseftis, who in fact constructs an entire highly sophisticated rationale for why it could not have been Greeks who arrested the Brits. And therefore, then we are absolved of the responsibility. In 1961, a very celebrated professor of Byzantine history at the University of Cambridge produced a book called The Dillasey Murders. Romilly Jenkins was his name. Again, excoriated as another Miscellin, because he had views on the Byzantine Empire which did not coincide with the canon here. And in the Dillasey Murders, the Dillasey Murders were in fact in the city of Dillasey. The British were in fact killed by the brigands, and that then made things much worse. And in chapter 4 of his Dillasey Murders, Jenkins committed, I think, the ultimate act of lèse-majesté by, in fact, saying that there are two truths in Greece. That's what made him a Miscellin. There are two truths in Greece: national truth and historical truth. And when the two truths clash, national truth prevails. I don't have the time to go into that, but I think that all these things are intimately linked to what we're discussing right now, in terms of the construction of our own collective self, and of how, in fact, we address problems, and how we avoid addressing problems until it's too late.